Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. You're watching TechStrong TV. Today's Tuesday, May 12th, episode 32 of TechStrong TV. You know what? All 31 previous episodes are available on TechStrong.tv, I think, as well as Digital Anarchist, if you can get a chance to catch them there. I believe they're also available on our OTT channels on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, that's on the DevOps.com app on those platforms, as well as the DevOps.com app for Android and iOS, as well as iPad. So if you haven't caught all of them, or maybe you want to go back to some of the earlier episodes, please do so. Also, quick reminder, we have our TechStrong Con coming up June 4th. It's open to everyone. It's a virtual event. We've got, we probably have 25 or 30 speakers already lined up. Actually, one of the archive videos I'm going to show you today by Emmett Keefe, the founder of Insight Ignite. Emmett's just signed to speak at our event as well. So TechStrongCon.com. Go there. You can sign up right now. Slots are limited, though, so don't wait. Also, if you're into chatting or joining in the conversation along our TechStrong TV, you could do so in the chat at TechStrong TV. TechStrong.tv, or you could join our community Slack channel at TechStrongTV.slack.com. You can get an invite over at TechStrong.tv as well. So lots of ways to interact, lots of things to do. You know, some of us are getting back on. I don't know if people are going back to their office yet or not. Here in Palm Beach County, Florida, where we are, we're under a phase 1 opening, so some restaurants at 25%, stuff like that. But, you know, the governments can say they're open and give permission, open as much as they want. I think it really is a question of, do you feel safe going to your office, going to a restaurant, going to a movie, or even to get your hair cut? And that's a personal decision that you'll have to make based upon your own, you know, managing your own risk, so to speak. The only thing I was out this weekend. We played golf. I think I mentioned it yesterday, and, you know, my sons and I wore our masks, and I went last night to pick up some dinner and takeout and curbside delivery, and of course everyone was in masks as well outside of their cars. So it's really a matter of personal choice and what feels right to you, and hopefully everyone is well and healthy. Anyway, regardless of that, we've got a great show for you today. Today's show may in fact be one of the best shows we've had so far. I just really like the content we've got lined up today. Let me tell you a little bit about it. We're going to lead things off with an interview I did with Elad Koren of Perimeter X. Elad runs products over at Perimeter X, and they are a security, cyber DevSecOps company. And Elad and I talk about something called shadow code. And shadow code meaning, develop undocumented code changes in apps. You would think with all the change management infrastructure we have, that wouldn't happen, but it does. It's real. And Elad and I have a good conversation about it, following up to a podcast we actually did a couple weeks ago on that subject. After Elad, I'm happy to have Jitin Agarwal of EPAM. EPAM is a large consulting company, digital transformation, cloud, migration, etc. And Jitin's going to tell us a little bit about what EPAM has been doing and how this whole COVID situation is affecting the consulting industry. Then, as I mentioned, we are going to go back to the archives. We're going to go back to our Predict 2020 event, which happened just at the end of January, where we're going to have Emmett Keefe III of Insight Ignite talk to us about how to accelerate the pace of digital change. And, I don't think Emmett quite envisioned a pandemic, but I think a lot of what he tells us in that is true today. Next up, it's Tuesday, and that means it's John Willis Day. John has his cohort, compadre from Red Hat, Jabe Bloom. And if you don't know Jabe, there's 4 people on John's team there. There's Andrew Clay Schaefer, Kevin Bear, John, and Jabe Bloom. The other 3, John, Kevin, and Andrew, are very, very well known in the internet space. Jabe may be the smartest of the 4 of them, though, and just a rock star. Jabe Bloom is a rock star. And John and Jabe are going to talk today some design patterns and platforms in IT, and a new pattern that Jabe is enunciating or doing the preliminary work on around 3 economies. So that's a really great conversation. Don't miss it. Before John, actually, I'll probably do the news. Then we'll head things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, who has another pretty well-known guy, Ben Singelman, CEO of Lightstep. Of course, Ben was instrumental on the Google microservices team prior to founding Lightstep. We'll have Mitchell at the analyst corner with his commentary. And then we have a great channel roundup to end things up today. Mike Vizard is joined by his partner in Channel Crime, Frank Olhurst, and Mike and Frank do a great roundup. I'll be back to close things up, and that's the show. It's probably a good three and a half hours long today, but I think every segment on here is great. So I hope you'll enjoy it. We're going to take a commercial, and I'll be right back with our first guest.
Tech is strong. We may be working from home, but tech goes on. Tech will continue to collaborate. Tech will continue to communicate. Tech is strong. Join us for TechStrong Con, June 4th, 12 hours strong, Tech Strong. Featuring John Bacha-Galupe Willis, Shannon Leitz, William Hurley, Jasmine James, Kat Swatell, Cornelia Davis, James Wickett, Courtney Kistler, Damon Edwards. Live Q&A with speakers, exhibit halls, and more. Free, but register before spots fill at techstrongcon.com.
Hey everyone. You have a special insertion for today's TechStrong TV. The Appian World Conference, which we were going to do at Digital Anarchist live, of course, didn't happen, and we had to go virtual with it, or Appian had to go virtual with it. It kicks off today with their keynote, and then tomorrow's keynote, Wednesday's keynote, is CTO founder Michael Beckley. Michael's a great guy. I've had the pleasure of interviewing him a few times. We caught up with him yesterday, talked a little bit about things like RPA, low-code, rapid application development, and I thought it was important enough to put in for today's show. So here's our interview with Michael Beckley, CTO, founder of Appian.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel, DevOps.com, TechStrong TV. Thanks for joining us for this segment. I'm really happy to have as a guest my friend Michael Beckley, CTO, founder of Appian. Michael, welcome. How are you?
Great. Thanks to have me on the show again, Alan. It's always good to talk to you.
It's a pleasure to have you on, Michael. Of course, a little disappointed. We were so looking forward to covering Appian World in person this year. It was going to be right down the block from us at the Diplomat Hotel and Resort in Fort Lauderdale. And we were all set to go down, and obviously COVID, and it's all virtual now. But you make lemonade out of lemons, and Appian has certainly done that with Appian World. Before we jump into a lot of the stuff I wanted to talk to you about, Michael, give our audience a little bit of I don't know how much information you know or have on Appian World, but the virtual event, people can go to it and see. Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. We've turned Appian World into I like to joke, fully immersive digital experience. No more analog conference this year. So 2 days of content. Tomorrow, Tuesday is the real kickoff, and then Wednesday you get to stick around for my keynote. And we've got partners, sponsors lined up with hands-on sessions and discussions with clients on how they're using low-code automation in the field, how they've responded to COVID, how they have made innovative strides in shortening their supply chains, and showing basically the importance in this climate of having an agile platform for rapid change. And so a lot of new content from the latest features in Appian, of course, and bringing together full stack automation, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, together with our strength in human workflow.
Fantastic. Michael, and as you mentioned, it's Tuesday, Wednesday, but it's available on demand as well. It'll be available on demand, maybe for people who are watching this not live, but later.
Yes, yeah, there's certainly another advantage of the digital. You can always time shift your conference if you like, but we will have a number of live engaging events if you want to be a part of that experience and seeing Matt's keynote live, for example, tomorrow morning. I definitely would invite you to try to tune in live and see what happens. It's always something unexpected with a live taping. So.
Yes, as we found out. I had one this morning. It was an adventure, but we'll leave it at that. So, Michael, our audience is of course familiar with Appian. We cover Appian a bunch here, and they're also familiar with the term low code. As a matter of fact, I remarked to someone just recently, I always thought of Appian low code, right? They go together, right? It was Appian, the low code folks. But I'm seeing more and more companies now, harnessing the term, using the term in their marketing, helping people, with maybe not prime developer skills get rapid deployment and development. So it certainly seems like though Appian might have pioneered low code, it's a thing now, right? There's a whole movement, a whole industry around it.
Yeah, there's
Curious,
a whole
yeah. From your catbird seat as one of the founders of Appian, it's got to make you feel good at some level that you're seeing kind of the rest of the world, acquiesce around this.
Oh, yeah, certainly. I mean, there's when we took the company public in 2017, that was the first IPO of a company on low code, and that positioning was still relatively novel. So to see it now become a completely industry standard and a expected line item in every company's IT budget to have a low-code platform, or multiple low-code platforms for that matter, that is a validation, certainly, of our strategy and our investment. And it's not always the case that when you try to popularize a market segment that the rest of the world takes notice. So I think that it is terrific to see. At the same time, it introduces a fair bit of confusion, and it's up to us to explain why we're different and why our low-code automation is uniquely positioned to help people in times like these.
Excellent. So, that was the magic phrase I was waiting for, times like these. Michael, if there was ever a time where we need rapid application development, low code kind of, hey, we've got people who need to get the word out, who need to get a quick app out. It certainly is now, right? With everything going on with COVID, I would imagine there's got to be, craziness at Appian with the amount of companies that are requesting help in developing apps that need to get out. I mean, whether they're life and death apps for people's health and stuff, or life and death of a business, right? As we transition to all remote and everything. What are you guys going through over there?
Well, it's also interesting for us because we have this business which is not so directly impacted as other people are, right? We're in a position to help, but the industries we serve, government, financial services, healthcare, they definitely are on the front lines of dealing with this issue, and they need applications. It's without a doubt been busy, and I think as well we were looking for ways that we could be relevant and meet the need with something more than just the platform. And so we used our own tools in the first few days of the crisis back in March to build a free COVID response app that we distributed to hundreds of the largest organizations in the world. And and we subsidized that. We put it up in our cloud. We paid for it, and it was totally free for those, and it's still totally free for those people who already signed up. We don't, that was really important to keep us all feeling like we were going to be part of the solution. And it also kept us connected to our clients such that we were able to understand where their thoughts were and what their future challenges were going to be.
Excellent. And that's commendable, and thank you to the folks at Appian. If you're allowed, we're not going to disclose anything confidential. Give us an idea of some of the apps and like frontline kind of stuff that, and if you don't want to mention companies, that's fine. But some of the ways that people are using Appian to really help here, and you mentioned government, healthcare, nothing too important. Give us an idea.
Right. So Bletchley Community Health in the UK, part of the National Health Service. They used us. They built an app in a week on Appian to manage and coordinate care across 600 physicians, 15 facilities, 240,000 patients. Wow. And, that's the kind of project that just gets everyone at Appian excited and motivated to feel like we're all pitching in, to help the frontline, healthcare workers. Sure. And protect the larger community. We're working with manufacturers, global manufacturer of consumer products, and they're incredibly happy with the results. 6,000 employees that they're tracking their health on, and they're obviously global production facilities, and now we're working with them on how to begin safely returning people into offices and workplaces as they can use Appian to track their facilities, incidents at any facility that might require deep cleaning, capacity. Obviously you can't just cram everyone back in the same old offices. So right. Tracking what kind of capacity they can get in an office, in a workplace, and so being that kind of command center for where they go next. And I like to point out, they're very happy with us, but it's going to take longer for their lawyers and legal department to approve using their name than it took to build the app. So,
absolutely. Michael, so what about Appian, the employees of Appian themselves? How is this whole COVID thing kind of worked its way down to your own employees? Everyone's working remotely, right? Helping do important application development like this. How are you guys holding? You had to change your whole Appian World virtual. How are you guys making out through all this?
We have been very lucky. We've been very lucky. We have been virtually unscathed by the disease itself. We've had very few employees directly affected, and we've been able to assist in those cases. And those are such a well, how do I put this? It's important to us first and foremost to take care of our teams, and we are a global company, so we've been keeping track of the disease and its impact in so many different countries, and just obviously business as usual might be going on in one state, but it's certainly not in some countries, and so being able to be responsive to the needs of our staff around the world and using our systems to stay in touch, that's worked out very well for us. And I think that we were an unusual company in that, as a software firm, we have long prided ourselves on doing everything we can at headquarters, and our software development, our testing, all of that, for the vast majority of that run out of headquarters. But through the years, we've been around for 2 decades. Our ability to do remote development, and it started with those first few employees who relocated to Denver to raise their kids around their grandparents or whatnot, and so we had laid the groundwork for a system like this. And when we went public, we took the company public. We, for business continuity reasons, fully built out the capacity to do everything remote. And as a cloud software company, as a cloud RPA company, for example, we are already as well no longer beholden to the office in any meaningful way. So our ability to deliver remote support for our clients, to remotely administer systems, all of that was already in place. So there was no scramble there to get up and running, no loss in productivity. And we actually shipped Appian's first quarter release without a hitch. And
that's great.
And we're on track to deliver our next major release in just a few weeks. So that I've really just been incredibly impressed with the team, and how they've stepped up and delivered. And we all know how these video conferences can take an added toll on you, and how much more programmed our days are, and the natural little breaks of even walking between meetings are gone.
Yeah, it really is, one to the next. Though the flip side is you don't have the commute. I mean, for me, I don't have a big commute here in Southern Florida, but for people in big cities, it is. Michael, you mentioned RPA, and I want to dig into that. But before we do, I have one other area I wanted to talk about. Sometimes things just line up right, and sort of natural kind of working together. So we have, and it's, I guess, related to RPA, but you have low code, you have AI, robots, which is part of RPA, obviously, robotic. But all of the robotics, the AI, the low code, seem to, at some point, there's a nexus here where they come together, right? That Venn diagram where they overlap, and we get a 1 + 1 = 1 + 1 + 1 = 5 rather than 3. Talk to us a little bit about that, if you don't mind, and that could take us into RPA if you want.
Sure. Yeah, and I would say equals more like 30 or even 300 rather than 5.
Okay, fair enough.
And this was always the design. When I was explaining to new employees at Appian going back 15 years ago what we were up to, I explained it this way, that we were providing an environment in which you would design human workflow and how people could interact with rules engines and systems, but that this was going to be the foundation for something so much more powerful to augment human potential, to speed work and productivity, and enhance human decision making with artificial intelligence. And we didn't call it robotic process automation back then, we just said automation. And the assumption was that by designing a human workflow, designing the lanes into which work travels, and you're providing a context and common sense and guardrails that make it possible for today's systems to assist humans with a high degree of accuracy and reliability. If you try to just use robotic process automation without having designed an end-to-end process, you're setting yourself up for a lot of pain. If you try to use artificial intelligence in a general way, you fail. If you have a targeted data set and you have a targeted outcome and objective, then machine learning and AI can be incredibly effective in today's world. And so now we've sort of met the market with this framework and foundation for doing incredibly powerful work that augments human potential rather than replacing humans.
Excellent. And I think you're right. Too many people focus on the replacing humans element. It's funny. We have an analyst firm that we spun up as part of MediaOps, but it's a separate entity called Accelerated Strategies Group. And one of the analysts from there, Bob Resselman, just published a book on automation. It's a series of essays that he's been writing for 2 years, and about how it'll affect, how automation is going to affect jobs and human employment and stuff like that. And I think too many people are focused on the replacing of humans rather than the augmenting of human, right, work product.
Our systems are getting so much more distributed than ever, and that's not going to change. We're going to have data in more websites and more APIs and more systems, and that challenges human workers. And using robotic process automation, using AI, using integration engines, we can harness all of those systems, pull that data together, and make it easier for people to do their job far more productively. And that's really where I see RPA, especially cloud RPA, like Appian is delivering, as relevant in these times. And with a lot of people, we want to get back to work. We want to give them the tools that are going to get them up and running quickly, allow them to step into complicated environments, give them the information they need to make important decisions with confidence. And that's how automation is really, it's workflow. It's workflow with new workers assisting the human worker, those digital workers, those algorithms and bots.
But that also, but it's peanut butter and chocolate with low code, right? Pardon my phrase there, right? But it really, it fits in because the logical conclusion is, okay, if I have all of this, right, and using a low code environment, I could make heads or tails of this and create an application, right, that helps people here.
That's right. And it's, I think it's much more than about having a human in the loop. It's about people being in control, people being in charge. And that means also being able to respond to change. And bots are great when there is no change. Bots are great when everything is repeatable and consistent. And desktop bots are great if you're sitting at a desktop in the office. But you need agility to respond with human decision making and human agility, and that's what we're trying to accomplish here. And if you have something completely new like COVID, well, there's no template for that. You have to have that ability in a low code environment to compose something new that takes advantage of the building blocks that you have in place, but will give you something absolutely new, something unique and tailored to the crisis at hand.
And that's exactly where we are with it. Michael, we're about out of time, actually a little over time. But one last just little area, if you don't mind. We're going to get through this, right? But I don't think there's any going back. People don't go backwards. Time marches forward, right? What do you think, as a result of everything now we've been through in the last 2-3 months and what we're going to be through in this shorter period of time, going into the future, this is an accelerator for what was only going to be anyway? Does this take us off in sort of a different timeline, if you will? Another reality? What do you think sticks from this?
Well, what I hope to see stick is that people recognize that the days of large-scale data processing requiring large teams of people working on traditional code are gone. We don't have the time anymore. When something important happens at scale, we need to have new tools that can keep up. And I think that you can also see that we need a complete solution framework. You can't assume going in that one automation technique is going to be the solution. Take a look at what happened with the Small Business Administration when they banned using RPA to submit applications for the Paycheck Protection Program. And Appian customers could choose between API integration, human workflow, and using RPA still to integrate with their own internal systems and route around any broken bot that may have been interacting with SBA. But if your only answer is one type of automation, then you're not resilient. You're not in designing for resilience and crisis management. So I think that's another lesson that's been learned out of this. I think that's really affected people's way of thinking. It's not clear what will come next, but it is clear that as a society, we're certainly going to be much better prepared.
I hope so. I hope to see you at a future in-person Appian World, maybe down here in South Florida again. I know you guys usually go from the East Coast to the West Coast year in, year out, so hope we didn't lose our turn. But anyway, Michael, stay safe and well during all this.
All right. You as well, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Beckley, CTO founder at Appian World, here on DevOps.com and TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. Prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
Okay, everyone, right here back in the studio, and we're going to jump right to our first segment today. As I mentioned, my guest on this one is Elad Karen, who's the VP product at Perimeter X, and Elad and I have a great conversation on shadow code. He'll explain to you what it is, and I think you'll enjoy it. Here we go.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. It's Alan Schimmel, and we're back here on TechStrong TV. My guest for this segment is Elad Karen from Perimeter X. He's VP of Product there. Elad, welcome. Welcome back. We just did a podcast a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here again.
Absolutely. So let me first of all say, for anyone interested, Elad and I did do a really nice podcast on Perimeter X and shadow code, and it's available on iTunes and Spotify and Stitcher and SoundCloud and all the usual suspects. It's also available on our Security Boulevard DevOps.com sites with the transcript of our conversation, as well as the streaming media, so you can check that out. But for a lot for people who don't want to do that, right? They're lazy or whatever. But they don't know Perimeter X. Give them a quick background.
Yeah, sure. So Perimeter X has been around for about 5 years. These 5 years, we've been helping digital businesses address the challenges that they have online. It started with the bot mitigation solution that we've had, the Bot Defender, and just recently, about a year ago, we launched our newly developed product, the Code Defender. The Code Defender, you mentioned shadow code, is trying to address the client-side vulnerabilities where each and every one of the developers in the company can just add code. This is the shadow code, kind of like the shadow IT issue that we had about a decade ago. And this code can definitely introduce vulnerabilities and issues and the repositories that are long forgotten by who originally developed them. And this is the shadow code that we intend to protect the company from. And in general, if you take the solutions that we've had along the years and the solutions that we intend to develop through the years, digital businesses face tons of challenges. And I'm sure you are well aware. These challenges interrupt them with their business. They want to go and do business and open their digital gates for buyers. However, bots are coming in, fraudsters are coming in, their competitors are coming in trying to scrape the prices that they have. The underground is trying to skim accounts from their checkout pages. All of this interrupts them with where they want to go. And this is where we come in. We can and help them solve these problems.
Excellent. Good. And Perimeter X is perimeterx.com?
PerimeterX.com, correct? Yes. Yep.
Good. All right, let's jump in a little bit with the shadow code discussion. So, if people are familiar with the term shadow IT, it's a very easy jump to what shadow code is, right? It's sort of undocumented or unknown code changes that were made to applications or that maybe live in the cloud. They could be private cloud, public cloud, whatever, public facing or even internal applications. So after our last conversation, I had a chance to think about it a little bit. Now, in my day, and I'm not that old, but one of the big struggles was what we call change management, right? The struggle to get developers to notate and document, right, changes was constant. And you had all of these idle, ITIL and ITSM, all of these frameworks that was so big in like the early 2000s and mid, 2010, 2008, where change management became a religion unto itself, right? And they worshipped at the idols of idol, right? And it became a monster. It became such a process-driven, frankly, pain in the ass, right? That people just didn't want to do it, right? To put a change order through, to change a little piece of code, it was more than it was worth. And is that what's driving, or one of the drivers, you think, in shadow code? Or do you think it's just the ease of, with the technology we have today, it's really easy to just make a change?
So you're touching on a great point. I think it's a combination of a few things. First, you have a lot of millennials out there. Millennials, they don't like to wait, okay? They don't like the effort of trying to build everything from scratch. They build something upon somebody else's work. And hey, with the open source projects that we have, we are handing them with the right solutions. And if you go into a, development team today, the first thing that you'll hear when they have a new story that they need to address from the product that asks for something, they're asking, hey, maybe there's a library that we can use out of the box and just do small adjustments. This is a classic case. Why is it a classic case? Because, at the end of the day, when we are trying to increase our revenue, when we are trying to speed up our businesses, the end result at the end of the day is that we're trying to do that more efficiently. And doing that more efficiently means that we want to use as much of ready-made code as we have. Now, it started with ready-made code within the company. And developers looked at other developers within the company to use and reuse that type of code, one project to another. However, now with the open source projects that we have and a lot of repositories out there that just, hand it out to developers, this is where security and usability encounter like in a head-on collision. And we know that in the world that almost idolizes efficiency and business impact and business outcomes, the fact that developers will just take that code and put it in and say, hey, but it's an open source repository. Open source, that means a lot of eyes have looked at it. It must be safe. And it's not the case. And if you go back to the podcast that we've had, I gave an example. A very known vendor of a very big e-commerce site used jQuery library from an untrusted source. And this was something that lived there for years, maybe 2-3 years, until they caught it and our product caught it in a trial that we had. And that is a case where, it could have gone unnoticed for months. And who knows what could have been injected along with that jQuery when it was loaded dynamically, because that's jQuery there. But for other organizations, we found multiple issues in code that the developers thought, hey, it's safe, it's open source. And nobody along the way did anything to examine what happens dynamically when this library is loaded, when the page is called, when the browser opens the site. And this is key.
Yeah. One thing I want to make clear is what you're describing is a classic, they call it SCA now, right? Software composition analysis. And it's kind of code word for open source. But it's not just an open source problem, right? You can buy proprietary modules that give you certain functionality in apps. You could write your own. You may not see not the malware, but the potential vulnerability until you actually run it, right? Whether you run it in a sandbox or some, that's a whole different, another discussion.
And I think the thing is that the complexity and the sophistication of the attackers is constantly growing. And we see that all along the way. In the past, you had malwares and Trojans that when they were sandboxed, they knew how to shut down their systems
Yeah.
and evade detection. Now, attackers today are doing quite the same. If they're identifying that they're called to something that does not have any communication, it's a sandbox, development, anything such, they'll just evade and avoid sending the information externally because they know they'll be caught. And you mentioned that it's not just the open source. Funnily or weirdly enough, the open source or the other repositories that are bought or proprietary, it even does not end there. It also extends to third-party libraries that are bought as services. And I mentioned MageCard, and I know MageCard is a widely known attack. It's a bunch of groups that are skimming private information of users of the site. One of the most interesting cases of MageCard is the fact that they're leveraging a third-party vendor, something that sites put deliberately, knowing that there is a vendor out there. And once you can hack that vendor and inject a code in their third-party script, you, as the e-commerce that has that third-party script or library, you are at risk because that thing just sends the information externally, and this is going unnoticed as well. So it's a combination of all the array of
I mean, that is, I don't know if you remember the big Target breach we had here.
Yeah.
Probably 5 years ago, right? It was a third-party vendor, an HVAC, air conditioning, heating and air conditioning vendor, who had access, who their systems got infected, but had access to the Target network, which was a flat network. And then once the bad guys pawned the HVAC vendor, they got them into Target and they ran wild, and the rest is history, as they say.
And you saw that in Target, and in the more modern type of attack, you saw that just last year with I think British Airways experienced something similar.
Yeah.
A subsidiary of Ticketmaster. So you've had a lot of publications.
I think part of it is, it's funny you bring this up a lot. I this weekend I was pulling what little hair I had out of my head. One of my salespeople has a deal with a vendor, and they sent us their digital, DOC, DPOC, whatever. They want to know what our third party, when people give us, personally like PII, how do we handle it? What do we tell them? They want all of our T and C's and, all of the language around it and who has access to it, all of that. And so in a small company like here, it somehow falls on me to do. Don't ask me why. And I spent like an hour cutting and pasting and filling in all of these things. And I came to realize, do they really care, this company that we're dealing with? No. But this way, they CYA, right? They covered their butt because they asked, we told them, and that's it. So there's a big attitude. It's not just that, it's the code. I gave it to a third party. It's their problem. Something goes bad. It's their problem. Wrong. It's not their problem. It's your problem, right? You can give out authority, but not responsibility. Ultimately, your IP is your responsibility. Your customers, integrity of your customers' data, your responsibility. You can't pawn it off to a third party, right? And I think the same thing holds true.
Yeah. So exactly. I mean, the thing that that you just mentioned, I can definitely relate. Back when I was in Payoneer, this was part of my role. So
yeah, you know how those go.
Yeah, and when I started in Perimeter X for about 1.5 years until we had a compliance officer, I was the compliance officer, so I'm well aware with, well acquainted with that type of headache, if you don't mind me saying. The thing is that they don't care. It's a liability shift issue. However, the liability doesn't really shift. especially with the California Act and the GDPR. Yes, you have the point where you're asking your vendor, are you doing the right actions to protect the data? Are you doing the right SDLC? Are you working according to the right practices, etc.? However, if a set of credentials or credit cards were obtained from your site because of a third-party script, nobody will know that it's the third-party script that was obtained or that was hacked. They will know, and you know,
they dealt with you.
Exactly. And you know, just chatting a bit of more information, because I was part of the credit card and payment cards industry, I can tell you how it works. When the payment card industry, they have a bunch of chargebacks or they see a lot of fraud on cards, they do a CPP, common point of purchase type of analysis. And when they trace it back to the site that was using the third-party library that was hacked, they see that, for example, site abc.com was the one that these credit cards were used. They don't mind. It doesn't matter that it was an open source or a third-party script or what have you, or any type of shadow code, if you don't mind me using that term. And that reflects on the organization where the credit card was obtained. And this is the key.
Yeah. And when you say reflect, it reflects financially, right? They'll take away your ability to process credit cards, which for an online store, you might as well just shut up, right? You shut down. Or they make it so prohibitively expensive to process cards that it becomes 25% of your cost, right? It's like having a partner. So, you know, all of those things. Want to shift the conversation a little bit with you, Loudon. You know, when we talk about the shadow code problem, again, in my mind, there's kind of a carrot and a stick here. The stick is, look, I've got perimeter X, and I'm going to check this code, and I'm going to check my applications, and we're going to find out if we have third-party problems or just, you know, vulnerable code, or we have code changes that we're not aware of, right? We're going to find out, and if we do, oh boy, things are going to happen, right? So I think we always need that. The carrot part of it, though, is how do we change the mentality of developers and DevOps and you know, the whole software supply chain to say, hold on, you can't do this, it's bad. You need to follow change procedures, you need to follow good security principles before we start making changes on code, updating even a third party. You know, I'll tell you something. I remember, it's still a secure company I founded. I went to New York 15 years ago. And I met with one of the CIOs for Citibank. At the time it was Citibank, not Citi. And we were talking about Microsoft Patch Tuesdays. I said, how long does it take you to update, you know, a Microsoft Patch Tuesday? He said between 90 and 120 days. So they're always 4 months behind, right? Because Patch Tuesday came once a month. I said, aren't you worried? You know, by the 90, 120 days, there'll be exploits in the wild on these patches that you're not installing. He said, Alan, we have, I forgot what it was, 400, 500,000 nodes, right, whatever, on our system. We're running thousands of internal applications that we built. We cannot roll out a patch until we've tested it on every kind of system we run, on every application we run, to make sure that it doesn't break something else that's even more valuable. And so that was their culture. And that's the way it was. How do we change that, or how do we get some of that into shadow code?
So I think what you're describing is something that is either relevant to what was in the past, you know, the 90 to 120 days, right, or in organizations that are still very big with a lot of legacy systems. It makes sense for them. However, and this is where I think the fit between Perimeter X and our cadence of releasing new things and the e-commerce and the web industry, that is where they meet. And the result of that is the fact that I don't know how you worked back in the days where you with your companies, but today a lot of companies are shifting the QA and security and kind of whole thought of development onto the developers.
Right.
This type of paradigm shift triggers a thought process for the developers when they start the development. And we see that internally within Perimeter X, but we also see that for our customers. They have to think of the security behind the things that they add. Now, I don't think, kind of like shadow IT, a lot of the people that use their devices, a lot of the people that use the services, they were completely oblivious to the fact that they introduced risks. I think that using a solution like Perimeter X's Code Defender can definitely highlight that. So, for example, if you have a staging environment and you're deploying the Code Defender on your staging environment and naturally on production, and you have our system, the Code Defender, basically once you're running the new code that you've added, the new library, any type of shadow code, you can immediately see what it does. So it triggers the developer the way the developer thinks and what he knows is going to happen when he deploys that to production. You instantly see that this type of code is communicating with an external domain. You quickly see that it pulls the code dynamically from an untrusted source or a trusted source, and that there is no or there are incidents. And this is where, and I think the key, and I mentioned that in the podcast, the key is to blend into the processes of our developers, of our customers' developers. And if you blend into the process, what you eventually get is the fact that you increase the awareness and you hand them with what they need to do that with zero effort on their end. You don't have to configure anything. And this is key.
But that's DevSecOps is what you're describing right there, right? And I think the real key to it a lot is that security tool, like a Perimeter X, has to be geared for a developer to use, not necessarily a security pro. It has to be kind of in their flow and what they're used to, working in. But anyway, look, we're way over time. I'm sorry, I blew it. Hey, I want to thank you for coming back a second time and doing this video in addition to the podcast. It's a pleasure having you on. Keep it. We'll check back in a couple of weeks. We'll see what's doing with Perimeter X, how you guys are making out.
Great.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All righty. Thank you. Elad Koren, VP Product at Perimeter X here on TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Okay, back here in the studio now, as we're going to go to our next segment. And my guest for this segment is Jitin Agarwal. He's with EPAM. EPAM, if you haven't heard of them, are a pretty well-known consulting company. They've been around for years. Cloud transformation, digital transformation, cloud migrations, stuff like that. And, this situation with COVID and everything has obviously affected everyone. We're going to talk to Jitin a little bit about what they've got going on and how things have been affected over there. So here's Jitin Agarwal from EPAM.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. Thanks for joining us on this segment of TechStrong TV. My guest in this segment is Jitin Agarwal from EPAM Systems. Jitin, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hi Alan, thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. So Jitin, as we were talking a little bit off camera, and I don't know if we've ever had anyone from EPAM Systems on, not only on TechStrong TV, but on DevOps TV or any of our kind of channels. So why don't we start with giving our audience a good background on the company, what what the company does, and then specifically what you do.
Sure, Alan, absolutely. So EPAM Systems, as maybe your viewers are not as familiar with, is a solutions provider. We're providing IT solutions to Fortune 50, Fortune 100, 500, Global 2000, CIOs, and IT organizations. It's been around since 1993, went public in 2012, and has had, prior to this year, has had 36 quarters of 20% year-over-year growth. And it's done quite well, is one of the top stocks in the market in that regard. And then in terms of the way our business is distributed, geographically, we're about 60% in North America, about 30% in Europe, and the rest of it is about 10% for the rest of the world. Industry-wise, we're financial services, a little more than 20%. And then we have three verticals: retail and travel, hospitality, software and high tech, and the business information or media, which is about 20%, so those three. And then the last two are life sciences and healthcare, which is a little more than 10, and then the emerging verticals, which is really just an aggregation of lots of different business sectors. Yeah, it's about 10%. And what we help customers with, Alan, real simply, is to look at that life cycle of their IT business, from how do we really kind of dive into the consultative to help them understand what the problems are, and then design the solutions, and then engineer and build those, and then once they're built, operate and optimize them. And our differentiator, what makes us different, is our digital DNA, that engineering DNA that we have. We started as a developer for SAP 28 years ago. Wow. It's where the birth of EPAM happened with ARC back in 1993. So that gives you a little bit of summary of the business and kind of how we operate.
Excellent. So, and then your position with EPAM?
Oh, right. Sorry. So I run the enterprise products group, as well as some of the additional services that are within EPAM's larger umbrella, like open source, managed services, et cetera, et cetera. Several different components of that services that we offer to the market, as well as the IP that we productize and make available to our customers.
Absolutely. It's great. When listening to you describe your clientele, it's not dissimilar to our readers, our viewers, right, who come to our websites and everything. When you take all of North America, including Canada and Mexico, we're probably a little less. We're probably closer to 45, 48% North America, a little bit bigger in Europe, 32, not that much, 32, 33% in Europe. I would say where we're probably a little different is we do get a large audience, let's say in India. That could be 7%, 8% of audience. Singapore, Israel, the usual tech hotspots, right? Because they're the people who, we cater to DevOps, cybersecurity, cloud native, digital transformation. Speaking of digital transformation, let's look at your business prior to this whole COVID thing for a second, right? I have a couple of friends at some large consulting and IT shops, and a good chunk of their business prior to all of this was moving companies along their digital transformation, right? That means cloud migrations, hybrid cloud kind of operations, if you will, moving to more SaaS-based of approach, right? And open source, certainly, and cloud native is closely tied into this open source stuff. Is that a big good big chunk of your business prior to all the COVID, you think?
Yeah, Alan, I think you absolutely nailed it. I would venture to say that, more than 40% of our business is around helping companies with that digital DNA, that how do we do that, even before it became vogue, that remote by design concept, how do we operate in this distributed geographical environment using cloud-based architecture to enable things like DevOps, or the ability to push our technology from follow the sun type of approach for development, testing, and build, so that you're able to take advantage of distributed off ODCs or development centers across the globe to kind of deliver that value. So that is absolutely the kind of transformation that we've been helping companies do from even our inception.
Got it. So that was all just a setup, of course, to say, well, what have you been doing lately? And obviously, right, the world's kind of gone upside down a little bit, but not totally upside down. We talk to 4 or 5 companies a day on TechStrong TV. And what we're hearing are that companies that were further along with their digital transformation, we're further along with adopting cloud and SaaS and stuff like that, are having a much easier transition to a remote environment,
yes,
regardless of how, we'll get into what those remote environments look like in a second, but having a much easier transition to that than companies that weren't going down that path already. Yeah. Wondering what you guys do big enterprises though, Fortune 50, right? What are you seeing?
No, sorry, go ahead, Alan.
No, I was going to say, what are you seeing on your end of it?
That's absolutely correct. I think what we're seeing is our big CIOs, big organization, IT executives, leadership, they're really, it's like a double-edged sword that they're struggling with right now. On one side, it's the how do I ensure my organization survives? How do I have that remote access? How do I have all of the ability to operate and run my business in this C19 era successfully, end to end, right? And then, but at the same time, how do I set myself up to thrive once this era ends, because it will end, right? And then subsequently, how do I make sure I nurture and feed those initiatives that are going to drive the business forward in the future? So it's that survive and thrive kind of dual focus, and I think initially it may have been 80% on survive and 20% on thrive. And then as we kind of go through the era, it tends to, kind of migrate. And then at some point when the inflection point hits, you're going to see that flip to where it's going to be 80%. How do I kind of go out of the chute to thrive and continue to do the things to operate my business as usual, but it's not business as usual anymore. It's the next normal, right? Or the new normal, right?
Sure. Yeah, it is. And I think we still, we could guess about what that new normal is going to be like 3 months from now, 6 months from now. But what I do know is that we're not going to go back to February 1st, right? It'll be different. So the other thing is, look, where a good chunk of our audience, 60%, 62%, tend to be practitioners, 38% managers, executives. You're dealing with a lot of C-level CIO folks, right, who are making decisions based, for these large organizations. Nothing drives an executive of a company like that more bonkers than uncertainty, right? They'll manage risk if they understand what the risk is, right? They'll make the call on what to do and to manage it. The unknown, I think, is extremely scary to large enterprises like this. And to a large degree, with what we've been through in the last 5-6 weeks, I think it's been 5-6 weeks, there's a lot of unknowns out there.
Yeah.
Right? So, Jiten, what are you hearing from the CIOs that you guys deal with, from the executives? Right? How are they dealing with the unknown? How are they trying to embrace this and make it manageable for them?
Sure, absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Alan. It's it's challenging. It's to say the least, right? And nobody has a crystal ball, or if they do, they're very cloudy at best. Right. And you're right. We do deal with a lot of these CIOs and executives, but we also really get into the ground with projects with developments in stream. So we actually have both the top down and the bottoms up. And here's what we're seeing. We're seeing that about a third of the focus is around the collaborative tool sets, technologies, the new operating norms, what we call remote by design. And it's really the ability to kind of remotely operate organization-wide. I mean, companies went from a few people working remotely when they were on holidays or out of the office or et cetera, to now entire departments, organizations, divisions, to the entire company now working remote. Just as an example, in EPAM, we went to 98% remote over the course of a week, really 3 days, without a single blip on the radar of a customer drop or issue. So that kind of massive transformation from everybody in the office every day to everybody working remotely, how do they make that work from home work, right? What does that actually look like? And now, as we know, 5-6 weeks later, it's not just work from home, it's work is home. Right? How do we make that successful for everybody? So that's about a third of the focus. About 25% of it is how do they kind of rebalance the budget and think about the new charter versus old projects or existing projects that might have been on deck. For example, they might have been doing a big network upgrade in their offices. Well, not really as germane.
Not a
right
big
now.
priority. Yeah, right. That got moved down my list.
Exactly. Maybe the VPN system needs an upgrade because now everybody and their brother is accessing my secure systems via remote connections, and maybe I didn't have enough throughput for something like that, right? As an example. Right. Another quarter of their focus is looking at infrastructure, right? Things like cybersecurity, supporting their online traffic and online business, especially if they're retail, and infrastructure, right? The things that they didn't necessarily think about or view in the lens of this world, because again, who could have? And so subsequently now it's very much how do they pivot, support that, position themselves for success. And then lastly, what are the new business models? What are the new focus areas that have arisen that they have to deal with within online everywhere, everything for everybody? What does that then mean, right? How do I then make sure that I lay the seeds for that groundwork in order to operate successfully or to survive this period? Does that make sense?
Makes total sense to me. So, kind of question. So, one of the things we've seen with this COVID thing, right? Look, the federal government needs more money. They want to bail out industries or small businesses or whatever. They just print it, right? Large enterprises, they just can't print money. They could borrow money, right? There's a cost to borrowing. They can shift budgets, right? From that large office network upgrade, we're going to take that and put it into maybe VPN.
Right.
VPN space, VPN, bandwidth. But what are you seeing overall with budgets? Because at the same time, people are saying, oh my God, after 10 years of a relative bull market, good times, right? We may be in for some bad times here and we've got to retract. We better pull back a little bit. We better keep some dry powder for bad days. So what are you seeing?
So, Alan, a couple of things there. One, I think absolutely, without a doubt, you nailed it. I think companies are having to, across the board, tighten their belts and better understand how they're going to operate. What are the must-haves versus the should-haves versus the nice-to-haves, and how do we then, again, to use a SDLC terminology for backlogged, right? But how do they then focus on the must-haves and really batten down the hatches there, and look at the should-haves and kind of make a business call, and then perhaps the nice-to-haves, are just are left on the deck because there's just not enough of dry powder, as you said, to really do that. But here's a couple other things they're thinking about, right? I think what we're seeing, at least, is how do we have that borderless collaboration? How do we kind of extend our network to go beyond what we can do as a company to be able to successfully execute and deliver? maybe there are things that we don't have to all do ourselves as an enterprise, and we can go to partners and the ecosystem and the sort of the worldwide base of technology that's out there to take advantage of that, right? Operate, lower the cost, increase efficiency. How do we make sure that all happens? So I think that's an additional component they're thinking about is what does that collaboration? One other element that's of course important is their ability to ensure in this remote environment, work from home, what's the productivity? Are they able to get the kind of productivity that they're looking for, that they're expecting from their folks? And then last but not least, what are the opportunities to perhaps leverage other infrastructure, other providers? How can they make 1 + 1 = 3 to take better advantage of, scale and opportunities that might not be available? We've had customers come to us say, what are your BCP options? How can we kind of expand the portfolio so that we cover our bets, reduce our risk, and perhaps manage budget and cost better?
Yeah. I think one of the other things, though, Jaden, is, for a long time, it was good times, right? And look, I've been in IT for a long time. I saw the dot-com bubble come up and bust, and then the Web 2.0 and the recession and all this stuff. What we've seen over the last 10 years is no one said, I want to be fat, right? I want to have excess capacity. I want to have extra people. Everyone was trying to run lean. In some ways, that whole lean inventory and just-in-time manufacturing has come back to bite.
Yes.
Some of us, because those are all dependent on a steady supply chain.
Right.
Now we find ourselves saying, okay, we got to tighten the budget. But is there enough fat without cutting into the bone? There's going to be babies thrown out with the bathwater here.
Right.
I imagine you guys are seeing that with Engage. I've spoken to friends who are in the consulting, and there's projects that are getting kind of put on hiatus or postponed indefinitely, or some just postponed a quarter or two, but could wind up being indefinitely. What are the kinds of you mentioned? Upgrading the office land. What other kinds of projects you think are sort of being de-emphasized right now?
So, Alan, you're right. I think there is the effort to refocus the energy, the lens on what does it mean to operate in this new remote world, remote by design model. What we've seen is that maybe some of the large system enterprise upgrade projects are put on pause to enable the business to pivot, to deal with the shift and the massive fluctuations in the business model. And so we've seen some of those perhaps be paused for a quarter or two because it's able to operate. It's some of the enhancements that were needed or wanted in order to address market needs, which have now completely changed. And so what we're seeing is a refocus on the new needs of the market as a result of the shift in the business atmosphere, and a pause in some of the more more large, all-encompassing kind of shift or lift or changes that were being perhaps put in place. Now, as you mentioned earlier, Alan, those companies that were perhaps ahead of the curve with the adoption of that cloud computing model and the ability to kind of the hyper agile type development, they perhaps have a little bit of a leg up because they've digested those big projects and they're now executing and delivering on them. Whereas others that might be somewhere midstream or maybe just investigating them might now put a pause in some of those projects. So that's kind of what we're seeing is a shift or a pivot to that which will enable the success in operations now over the next 3-6 months are getting a lift in business priority and funding and resources. And those that perhaps are not looking at that time window could then be deprioritized down, assuming they weren't impacting that. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. Makes 100% sense. We're almost out of time, Jit, and there's one other area I wanted to cover with you. And I'll be honest, I haven't had the nerve to ask my friends in the consulting businesses this question yet.
Okay.
So everyone's working remotely. Generally, companies like yours, in addition to providing products, which is kind of your neck of the woods, they provide consultative people, right? People who are on-prem, who are usually there for, they could be there 30 days to 3 years, right? Those kinds
Absolutely.
of engagements.
Or
How
more.
does, right, and then sometimes they become permanent. How does that work in a total remote, right? So I called you up, I said, we've got this project and I need some help with. How do you, forget your customers, how does EPAM do that in a total remote?
Right.
It's got to be hard.
Right.
Maybe it's not.
Right. Well, I really appreciate you asking that question, Alan, because it actually plays to our strength and our strong suit. So EPAM, since 2000 has really been developing a platform, which is part of the portfolio and what's part of my business, that enables us to operate remotely with 3 or 4 critical factors built in, right? First of all, we have that security and scalability to ensure our customers that which they entrust us with is therefore valid trust, right? We have that secure and reliable environment. The second thing the environment does is it enables access to all of the resources for all of our developers in a distributed fashion. So they're able to get to that information, that capability. For example, we're one of the largest users of Microsoft Teams in Central and Eastern Europe, like in the top 5, right? 40,000 plus people at any given period of time, millions of common conversations, communications, et cetera, right? And an infrastructure that supports all of that. So that's the second thing that the platform really does, is that ready access to that IP that we're all working on. The third thing it does is it creates a dashboard view of every project, every stream, and the productivity around that. So you can not just say, hey, I have people, they're punching the clock. I can also say, hey, what are they doing when they're punching the clock? Are they developing code? Are they doing collaboration? Are they doing research? And last but not least, I can compare that or bounce that up against the productivity. What are the commits to the GitHub that are happening during this time, same time that they're developing, and give them some coaching, some guidance, because different people have, adapt to change at a different rate. And some may be moving very quickly, and some, maybe a little bit of helping hand. So I think our platform is what enables us to create a just add water type solution for our customers that gives that confidence that, yes, Alan, I can take your project, I can put my startup team, we have these startup teams that are ready to go, throw it on it. It's got a couple of, front-end guys, a back-end guys, a couple of DevOps, and then, a couple of QAs, and boom, just add water, they're ready to go. And you can see what they're doing, how they're doing it, and the value that you're getting out of it. It's demonstrable. We can not just talk about it, we can actually show it.
Show it. Excellent. Excellent. Jen, I told you the 20 minutes goes incredibly quick, and that was a long time ago. I think we're way over that. But anyway, I want to thank you for joining us on TechStrong TV, introducing EPAM to the audience and talking about, this is what everyone's dealing with. So it's really right on time. I wish you well. Maybe you come back. At some point we got to get to the other side, and then let's talk about the other side, because we didn't get a chance to talk about that.
We did.
So maybe we can come back in a couple of weeks and talk about that as well. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Jitin Agarwal, EPAM Technologies here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with another guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
For our next segment, we're going, back into the archives for something old, not too old. Predict 2020, the end of January. My good friend Emmett Keefe. Emmett Keefe is a principal at Insight Partners, one of the largest PE VC players in our space. They just announced like a $9.5 billion round. I've known Emmett now a few years. Emmett's also the founder of something called the Insight Ignite series. And, you know, once a month in some of the greatest locations on earth, Emmett would gather, about 20 or 25 tech, like vendor executives and about 30 C-level executives from various large enterprises, and just really spend 2 or 3 days with great roundtable discussions, featured speakers, and some great activities. If you ever get a chance to be invited to an Insight Ignite, don't pass it up. It's a great experience. Of course, right now they're not doing them in person, but when they will again, and when they do, don't miss it. Anyway, Emmett spoke for us at Predict 2020 on how to accelerate the pace of digital change. And this is really, you know, called from his huge network of contacts. The reason I put this on here today is I also wanted to let you know that Emmett's agreed to talk for us, give us a conversation at TechStrong Con in June 4th. And it'll be great to have Emmett on there. You can get more information at techstrongcon.com. But right now, here's Emmett Keefe III, Insight Ignite from Predict 2020.
Hi, my name's Emmett B. Keefe III, and I'm the founder of Insight Ignite and an operating partner at the private equity firm Insight Partners. And I've got a keynote here with 2 parts. I'm calling it the State of Digital Change. We spent an incredible amount of time on the road last year meeting with more than 200 global companies, and we learned a lot about what they're doing from a digital business change standpoint. And I also am going to share over the last couple of years what we've invested in from a technology standpoint, and really what's on the mind of the market when it comes to technology. So with that, I want to show a quick video. This shows you what we were up to last year and how we learned so much about what's on the mind of the market. So last year, we were in 20 locations around the world, and these events were attended by 30 to 40 C-level executives from Global 2000 companies. So we just learned an absolute ton about what's on the mind of the market, and I'll talk in a minute about what we learned last year. Before I do that, I just want to share briefly who is Insight Partners. So we're a scale-up investor. We're actually tracking about 200,000 software companies globally, and these are all startups. These are companies that have received Series A money and are working their way towards 10 million in revenue. And our model is that the moment that they unlock and they're positioned to go from 10 to 20 to 40 to 80 and beyond, that's the moment that we want to invest. And that period between 10 million and 100 million is the scale-up zone. And our specialty as a firm is we invest there. We typically find only about 250 companies globally within that pool of 200,000, and then we select the 40 or 50 that we think are the absolute most promising. So that's a bit about Insight. Insight Ignite is a digital acceleration program. So we currently have about 200 of these scale-up investments in our portfolio. And what we do is we partner with Global 2000 companies to understand what their digital strategy is and what the technology drivers are behind that strategy. And then we look to curate insights that'll accelerate digital change. So that's what Ignite's all about. So I've got 2 slides in my deck that I had in the same presentation a year ago. Everything else has changed, but this is still largely where the Global 2000 are right now. They know that over the next 10 or 20 years, they have to fundamentally transform themselves. If I'm a traditional automotive maker in Germany, I know I need to look more like Uber and Tesla. If I'm a retailer, I know I need to look more like Amazon. If I'm a hotel provider, I need to look more like Airbnb. So everyone knows, it doesn't matter what the industry is, they know they have to fundamentally disrupt and transform their business. But largely they're kind of strapping into this rocket trying to figure out how are we going to get across this digital chasm. Most of what we're still seeing out there is what I call the theater of digital. So these are the foosball tables, the beer fountains, the torn up jeans, the incubators, et cetera, the bold statements. So a lot of what we're seeing out there now is still this sort of theater. We haven't seen much real disruption yet, but it's coming very soon. One big change last year, we acquired a business called Diligent, which provides a secure platform for board materials and board communication. And I've been spending more and more time in the boardroom, and I would say that digital risk has emerged as a massive topic in the boardroom. It's something they want to talk about, learn about, it's on their mind. And I would say compared to a year ago, the concern in the boardroom is significantly higher than it was at this time last year. There's also continued concern about cybersecurity and even more. And I think what we see happening right now is that digital and cyber are sort of emerging into one digital risk category on the mind of the board director. Most global companies have hired, pick your favorite strategy firm, and paid $10 million, pounds, euros, and they have a digital strategy now. They have all the documentation, the presentations, the materials. It's relatively straightforward to get a digital strategy. It's also relatively straightforward to transform digital delivery. So this is Agile, DevOps, cloud, cyber, data, AI, et cetera, et cetera. It's still very, very hard, and there's a lot to be done. I'll talk later, most organizations they still have a lot of waterfall, and it still takes a lot longer than they would like. But in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively straightforward compared to what I'm going to talk about next. Really the bottleneck, if you think about an innovation pipeline, on the left-hand side is the strategy, on the right-hand side is the delivery. In the middle is the inception of digital innovation. And that's really the bottleneck. This is the part that's not working. Most, I'd say all, Global 2000 companies that we had in this Chatham House rules type conversation basically said that central innovation is not working. This is the incubators, the labs, the accelerators. It's not working because they're not producing material revenue. We had a speaker come in from Jeffrey Moore's organization that talked about their point of view on innovation. And their point of view is that when you get to 1% to 3% of revenue, that begins to be material. And so if you're a 20 billion revenue company, it's only when you get to 200 to 600 million in revenue that really you've made some sort of an impact. And large global companies are not seeing these incubators produce that type of revenue. Also, they're too far away from the business. They tend to be central and not very well integrated into the business, and therefore they're doing solutioning, but not necessarily aligning with the business on the problems that need to be solved, and more specifically the timing related to when to solve those problems. The other thing we're seeing is that corporate venture capital is not working either. Most CVC funds were formed to focus on startups, looking at early stage technology. They were focused on trying to make money. And I think what most companies are now realizing is that actually we want to have a strategy that gives us wide visibility into innovation. We want to partner with venture firms and private equity firms. And we want to find technology that's entering that scale-up phase that we can help accelerate and ultimately integrate them better into our business. So most organizations are rethinking their corporate venture strategy right now. And then probably the biggest problem is that legacy culture eats strategy. So the problem is if I'm a 20 billion revenue company, I need to grow my business. I need to increase profitability. I can't go backwards. I can't go from 20 billion back to 10 billion and then up to 30 billion. And then also there's legacy infrastructure, applications, legacy thinking, legacy culture. And this is really choking innovation as well at these large global companies. And I have some exciting news to report, and that is that I think the expression digital transformation, the world is ready to retire that expression. I think everyone's realizing even the word digital probably is going to be retired at some point in the not too distant future. Really, this concept needs to be integrated into just how businesses operate, and they need to be in sort of a constant state of change. So it's really not about a one-time transformation. It's about just getting to the point where you can constantly be iterating and evolving and changing and delivering products and services in a much more digital way. We had a really interesting speaker last year from Bionic that talked about helping clients kill project zombies. These are legacy projects that are, 3-year projects, 5-year projects, where maybe you're spending 10 or 20 million a year to do something. And many of these projects are just zombies. I mean, everyone knows that they're not going to succeed. And so we're starting to see organizations making the brave decision to cancel some of these projects and then reallocate that capital towards digital change. So this is really where we are. And we've kind of been through what I call digital innovation 1.0, and everybody is entering into 2.0. And there's a lot of interesting things that are going to be happening next. The first thing, and this is not necessarily this is a controversial point of view that I came to last year, and that is that we're going to see an ultimate shift left, and that's that digital is going to shift out of IT over to the left, and it's going to direct report to the CEO. And I think we're going to see organizations getting way more serious about that digital inception phase, and really drive change. So we're going to see this shift left happening in the coming years. The other thing that we see organizations starting to realize is that solutioning is not the right answer, and even working with the business to identify problems to solve is not the right answer either. Ultimately, what it comes down to is timing, and really understanding when is the right time to deliver this solution, and how does the customer feel about the timing? Are they ready to adopt a new solution, especially when it has people, process, and technology change associated with it? Timing is absolutely everything, and I haven't found any really interesting solutions here yet, how to predict timing, but I think everyone's starting to become aware that this is a really important topic when it comes to innovation. And last year, a year ago, I would have said this is a futuristic idea. The good news is, I think over the course of the year, I think the world's realizing that really your digital strategy needs to be centered around the customer. And in the end, the customer knows the answer to all these questions. They know, which problems need to be solved from their point of view. They know the right timing, when to solve those problems. They know if the solutions are elegant enough. So the answer is with the customer, and I think the world is starting to move in that direction. And then I'd say one of the most interesting keynotes that we had last year was a speaker came in to talk about invention, and he asked us all to type the word inventor into Google. And what we found is basically a bunch of black and white images. So, Thomas Edison, Graham Bell, a bunch of people maybe 100 years ago that invented some really important solutions. He was making the point that really it's time to completely reinvent invention. And what he talked about is the fact that inventions happen when you bring data together that comes from different points of view, different parts of the world, sort of orthogonal type data. Ultimately, when those things come together, it'll spark some sort of a new invention. And historically, this was all done manually. He actually showed us that it's possible to leverage AI to actually automate the invention process. That was really, really interesting. And for me, a big takeaway from last year is it may be possible to automate innovation. We also had a speaker come in who talked to us about deploying a company front to back in 30 days. So write the product, create the press release, write the product strategy, create the product spec, create the website, create the mobile app, stand up the HR and finance systems, like everything you need to do to get a startup off the ground. He's automated that in a 30-day process. So it's possible just to get new spin out after spin out after spin out to market to see how they're going to react to it. Having said that, one of the big insights we've had last year is that spin-outs are going to be a very, very important tactic for large global companies. We heard from the former CEO of Match.com who talked about Tinder, and the fact that Tinder was actually invented inside of Match at an incubator in Texas. And it was being rejected internally, so he made the decision to spin it out. And we all know what happened in the end with Tinder. It was an extraordinary success and ultimately was spun back in and created a tremendous amount of value for Match. We also heard a speaker come in from Adecco who came up with a very innovative way to use AI in the staffing world. They ultimately made a decision to spin that out into a business called YOS. So I think we're starting to see organizations realize that this spin out capability is really important and potentially a life-saving strategy. The other thing we saw last year, and this is very, very early days, but I think large global companies are realizing that they need to bring entrepreneurs in-house, almost develop an entrepreneur in residence program, much like VCs do in the Silicon Valley, and let those entrepreneurs take a look around, let them look at the data, let them meet the customers, let them go visit the retail stores, let them look at all the assets that are inside the organization, and then ultimately decide what they want to spin out. I have a friend that did this inside of a Spanish bank, and they told him, come in here, take a look around. We'll provide your Series A. We'll help you develop the platform. We'll be your first customer. And ultimately, he spun it out and got Series A funding, and now is off on his way. I have this picture of David Bowie here just because we had his ex-manager speak at one of our events, and he shared a story about the minute that the internet was invented and the minute that all this digital technology was possible, he saw the disruption in the music industry and was one of the first musicians to really embrace it. So we need to get these creative, out-of-the-box thinkers inside of these large global companies. And then, the other thing that we're seeing a lot of momentum around is open innovation. I actually just met today with an organization. It's called, I won't say who it is, it's XYZX, that's developed a very, very sophisticated open innovation strategy. Almost this concept of a B2B exchange, I think we're going to see it come back. And large global companies are realizing they really have to partner with many different types of organizations, universities, private equity firms, venture firms, even their competitors, and ultimately come up with this innovation in a collaborative way. And then, we also had some speakers last year that talked about the power of becoming a platform. This is the Uber napkin on the right, and large global companies are starting to think about how do I create a platform? How do I become a platform? Early days, but lots to be done in the future here. And then the other thing we heard last year is that just IT agility is really not enough. So being able to deliver software in an agile way. If the business hasn't gone through a transformation to be agile at the core, then really it's hard to innovate. So this emergence of the idea of business agility is happening. I think it's going to be extremely challenging for large global companies to get there. I actually attended a Formula One race this past year and was kind of studying very carefully how fast these Formula One teams operate. And even many of our businesses that are young companies that have 200 to 500 employees operate at a slower pace than Formula One teams from a business agility standpoint. So big challenge for large global companies, and they're realizing they need to start heading in that direction. And then, the other thing, we had a speaker come in who's an expert in neuroscience that talked to us about creating a culture of change. And this is really a way to come at that legacy culture challenge, but organizations are realizing they have to build change into their DNA. Early days, and we're looking for lots of speakers that can help us understand more about this, but it's the beginning of what's going to move more innovation into the future. And then this is a really interesting one. We had a couple speakers come in that are leading massive change projects, and they've actually been analyzing their own willingness to change, their own ability to change on a personal level. And we had one speaker that was sharing with us that he almost put himself through a personal change readiness exercise. And if he didn't feel like he was evolving and changing enough as a person, that he wasn't the right leader to actually lead that organization through change. So I think we'll hear more about this in the future where just change readiness becomes front and center. And this is just a little piece of good news that I think we all came to last year. And we actually heard from several board members that sustainability is now emerging as a risk in the boardroom that's at the same level as digital risk. And obviously in some industries more than others, but probably in most industries, sustainability is going to present a massive business risk, which may actually help us in the future to accelerate change on this topic as well. And then, one of the most interesting things we heard is that many of the best digital change programs that have happened so far, and we heard from Mattel, the CTO of Mattel talked about the Hot Wheels transformation, and they now have a product out which is part analog, part digital. They really drove that transformation with purpose. So they rallied the whole organization around a specific social impact purpose, which allowed them to make all the changes they needed to make to get this new Hot Wheels product out to market, which was incredibly successful. And then in summary, and this is, again, maybe a bit of a controversial point of view, a year ago, I would have said that what we need is sponsorship in the boardroom, and that the board really has to sponsor all these topics top down, and all this digital change has to be sponsored top down. Really where I landed after last year and all these conversations is that in the end, it's about the CEO. And I think what we're going to see in the future is the rise of the digital native CEO. What we saw at Nike was very interesting last year with a former CEO of eBay, chairman of PayPal, CEO of SuccessFactors, becoming CEO of Nike. This is a hybrid leader who understands how to lead, manage, is an incredible leader from a traditional standpoint, but also has the digital native point of view to be this next generation digital native leader. So I think as we go into the future, we'll see more and more Global 2000 organizations making this change in order to have a better chance to get across that digital chasm. So with that, I just want to talk a little bit about what's on the mind of the market. And what's really interesting, I talked earlier about the 200,000 software companies that we're watching. And we do this with automation and AI, and we have a large team of people at Insight Partners that watch this database. The thing that fundamentally causes the businesses to unlock, and when revenue is going to go 10, 20, 40, 80 million, it's because the market decides, I want to solve that problem right now. So it's very interesting to look at what are we investing in, because that'll tell you what's on the mind of the market. So I looked, we just finished investing our 10th fund, and I looked through all the investments and kind of picked out the ones that were infrastructure related, and I wanted to share those now. So continuous delivery is definitely on the mind of the market. We had a speaker come in last year from Netflix that talked about Spinnaker, and we ultimately made an investment in Armory, which is commercializing Spinnaker. And this is all about just automating the continuous delivery process and really being able to deploy into any cloud and sort of integrate the whole CI/CD pipeline to get up to speed. I mean, I think Netflix is currently doing about 4,000 releases a day, where most global companies are still trying to get to where they can do once a month. So that's a big focus in the market. JFrog is also part of that continuous delivery lifecycle, automating the release process. Copado is doing this for the Salesforce environment. Tricentis is a big investment that we made around automating traditional testing. Testing can be a 3-month roadblock when you get to functional and performance and load and security testing. It's actually possible now to automate testing and run it in parallel with development. And Tricentis has done an extraordinary job building that business. And then lastly, LeanIX out of Germany has really automated the API process and making sure that all the developers and architects and people that are involved in the agile development process are able to see, what does our infrastructure look like? What's our application stack look like? What do I need to integrate to in order to get this software out the door? Very interesting business in LeanIX. And then, cloud native data and privacy has emerged as a huge topic. Devo is a next generation machine data platform that's basically disrupting traditional players like Splunk and Elastic. OneTrust is really addressing all the GDPR, and there's many other data privacy regulations out there, making it possible to get quickly through that data privacy process. And Sisense is also a game-changing platform that allows you to leave the data where it already is, and then leverage it in a very powerful way, and leverage AI tools to quickly get applications out that are leveraging the data. And then cloud native management has emerged as a big topic. You may have seen recently that we acquired Veeam, which was traditionally in the backup space, and there's still a lot of work to be done there, but they're now moving into data privacy as well. And Kasten, which is also focused on the Kubernetes and the container environment specifically, and providing the same type capability as Veeam. And then CloudBolt is really a sort of generic deployment platform, so you can deploy to any cloud that you want, or any sort of a virtual environment, and just makes it easier to sort of move workloads around as you're deploying software. And then cloud native security, obviously, most organizations have made progress on containers and microservices, and we've seen tremendous growth with Aqua, Sysdig, and Tigera that are basically helping secure containers, helping secure Kubernetes, and also helping identify what the bad actors are trying to do in that container infrastructure. So that's been a focus in the market in the last couple of years, is to solve cloud native security. And then this one is really interesting and very, very exciting. And this is really thanks to GCP and AWS. For the first time in this new digital world, it's actually possible to see what your customers are up to. So, recently I was trying to book a ticket to Singapore, and I was on a traditional airline website. I got stuck. I couldn't, get the transaction done. So I ultimately moved over to a generic platform, booked the ticket, and was on my way. That airline provider never knew where I got stuck, why I got stuck, and why I didn't book the ticket directly through them. So Quantum Metric built this analytics platform on top of GCP that, for the first time, lets you see what every single customer is doing as they interact with your web properties and mobile properties, and then spot the issues that are causing the biggest revenue leakage, and then point your development organization at fixing those problems. Game-changing platform. And then WalkMe was built on top of the AWS platform that basically provides a Google Maps type capability, so that now users don't have to get trained on how to use software. They don't have to remember how to use software. All they have to do is type into WalkMe what they want to do, and then the platform does everything else in an automated way. So some really exciting developments around this digital customer experience market. And then, this has been a big theme for us for a while, but we saw more and more automation happening, specifically in the cyber world, but really across IT ops, network ops, cyber ops, lots of interesting things going on. We made a significant investment in a business called Resolve, which is basically providing RPA type capability for really complex processes in IT, network, and cyber ops. And then Big Panda is an AI ops player that's going really deep on IT ops and automating that process. So lots of interesting things happening around AI ops and automation. And then, IoT has emerged as a mega theme. You may have seen recently we acquired Armis, which is a very fast grower, and their platform first helps organizations understand their risk of all these IoT devices. They actually had a client recently who thought they had 10 million devices in total across the globe, but actually it was discovered that they had 30 million after they ran the Armis risk assessment. And then they ultimately help secure these devices that don't have an agent running on them. Keyfactor is another interesting business that helps you secure devices that can run software. So I think where the world is right now with IoT is focusing on securing it, knowing that 5G is coming soon, and there's going to be all kinds of interesting opportunities right around the corner with IoT. And then we're continuing to see, I always say that in the absence of data, machine can't learn. And because there's so much data available in cyber, we're continuing to see really interesting businesses. Recorded Future is a business we acquired, which is leveraging AI for threat intelligence. And FeatureSpace is using AI in a really interesting way for compliance, to spot compliance issues. So with that, in closing, and I shared this in the beginning, I think there's a lot of work still to be done in these large global companies around sponsorship. So getting the right sponsorship in the boardroom, the right CEO that has those digital native capabilities that can sponsor true change. So that's a big topic that I think large global companies have to address. There's a ton to be done in this central innovation inception area. I'm actually searching myself for the answers, and they're hard to find, but it's something that Ignite's going to work very hard on, is to help find some of those answers. And then continuous focus on delivering digital capabilities at speed. So it's very, very early. As I mentioned, that picture of Evel Knievel there is kind of where we are, but it's going to be very exciting to see over the next few decades how things unfold. I'll wrap it up and say thank you very much. Hope there were a few insights in there for you. Have a good day.
I got the burgers. I went to Bun Barn, Beef Patty Palace, Tomato Town.
Oh, thanks for getting all this, honey.
No problem. Getting all of it just took about 2 hours.
I just wish there was an easier way to get all your burger fixings from one place, you know?
Wow.
Dad, you didn't go to Mayo King?
You know our car doesn't fit in their drive-thru. I went to Mustard Chef.
I hate this burger.
He also went to ketchup.
When you're building something using components that don't work together easily, things could get ugly, fast. You wouldn't live like this, so don't make your DevOps team live like this.
This lack of burger cohesion is hard on all of us, Cheryl.
GitLab is the only single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle.
Okay, everyone, back here in the TechStrong TV studios, and it's that time in our show where we do some of the news headlines from Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and DevOps.com. And as usual, I'm going to caveat it by saying this isn't exhaustive. It's just a few of the headlines. There's so much more on the sites. Please go check them out, and I'm sure you'll find something that you're interested in. But for Tuesday, couple things. On Security Boulevard, there's a good article on business leaders underestimate the COVID-19 security risk. And the issue there is, first of all, we've had a pandemic of security risk along with the COVID pandemic. And and at the same time, people working remotely and everything else, it's created a bit of a perfect storm. And I think business leaders have the gist of the article is that business leaders have underestimated this. Though I don't think cybersecurity folks did. I think we saw it coming. But as usual, there's always something lost in the translation. But check out the article. Another good one up on the Boulevard today is, why aren't enterprises developing more mobile apps? Interesting. You guys can read the article for yourselves. But, this whole COVID thing has certainly seen us transition to more of a remote footing. So you would think we'd have more mobile apps, and maybe we will. Maybe it just hasn't caught up with it yet. But check out the article. For Container Journal, we have Linode launches managed Kubernetes services. So they're going to throw their hat in the ring. Of course, there's more than several managed Kubernetes services available right now, but you can go check that out. Also, our friends at PortShift launched tools to secure the Kubernetes API. So we had some segments on TechStrong TV last week on this. Kubernetes API is becoming a real place where we're seeing security, managing the security of these API and API gateways, and how they work into the whole Kubernetes stack at the API level is getting a lot of attention lately, and probably rightfully so. So check out what the folks at PortShift are doing. And then over on, one more on Container Journal I'd like to give you, and that is how Kubernetes enables sustained business agility. And I think we're certainly seeing that right now as companies who are on Kubernetes and on, this new infrastructure are a little more agile, a little more nimble than maybe companies who aren't. But check out the article for more info on that. And then over to DevOps.com, a couple of articles to tell you about. A DevOps deeper dive, teams adjust to new working from home normal and how DevOps is helping that. It's a good article. I highly recommend that one. Citrix makes case for a VPN alternative. I think one of the casualties of this whole COVID thing will be VPNs once we get a chance to not, bailing water as quickly as we can to keep the boat afloat. People are going to look at, why are we VPNing into an office to go back out to the cloud? And I think there'll be better alternatives. Citrix thinks they've got a better mousetrap. Rubrik melds data management and DevOps. So this whole idea around data ops, data management, and how it integrates into the whole DevOps mindset, agile, lean, is, I think, really starting to bubble up. And this article is a great example of it. So again, not meant to be exhaustive, but some great articles on DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, and Container Journal today. Please do check them out. But now, it's Tuesday, and I want to introduce my friend John Willis, who has a great conversation with his compadre Jay Bloom. So here's John Willis and Jay Bloom.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, this is John Willis again, doing another podcast or video cast. I don't know what you call it, but I'm really excited about this guest who is actually my coworker at Red Hat as part of the Global Transition Office, GTO. Hey, Jay Bloom.
Hey, man, how are you?
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Good to get you on here. I mean, I've been telling you how much I've been learning from you on just so many levels. It's been really just a joy to work with you. So tell everybody who you are. Who is Jay Bloom?
Sure. So I started my career in IT in New York City during the dot-com boom. I survived the dot-com crash there. I was involved in building like some of the earliest websites from New York City. Was interesting because it primarily wasn't a technology base. It was a marketing base. So we had a slightly different view of what technology was used for, but I ended up often bridging kind of creative work with technology work because of the kind of creative bent that New York City had at the time. And I ended up being kind of the chief architect of what is now Razorfish. And I don't even think it's Razorfish anymore. I think it's something else. I think it might be Publicus now. Anyway, and then I went and I was a CTO for about 6 years at a company that makes software for the largest libraries in the world. And that was really interesting. I was kind of given the keys to figure out how to implement a software engineering culture down there. And I learned a lot, both good and bad. And I actually had someday we can talk about my DevOps epiphany was being a CTO in a corporation where I had almost all the control over the software engineers and then suddenly realized what I was doing to the support staff. And
you told me that. That's
a really interesting part of the conversation. Anyway, and then I decided to go back to school and get my PhD, which we can talk about a little bit. And in order to do that, I started a company with Kevin Baer, who's one of the co-authors of the Phoenix Project. And we spent about 6 years doing consulting for large global corporations. The company was named Praxis Flow, was based on how to... The basic theory of it was we need to do a bunch of research to figure out what's going to happen after DevOps. Because at the time, DevOps was quite young, but we were also quite confident that it was going to be successful. So we wanted to find companies to work with to think about what will happen after DevOps, which was a super fun kind of research project. So we would go in and help people kind of upskill on Agile and DevOps theory and ideas, but also play with what might happen afterwards once they become successful with those basic pieces. Cool. And then I got recruited to come hang out with you guys at Red Hat.
Andrew's grand plan, right? So
that's right. Yeah.
One of the things I love about working with you, our industry is made up of a lot of sort of really incredible people, a lot of smart people, you know.
Yeah.
But there's, you know, and I'm like as guilty as anybody. I'm not going to call out anybody individually, but we tend to banter a lot of sort of science. But you know, like you ask somebody like, they're like OODA loop, like, okay, go run, you know, like don't ask me any questions about it, or you know, and there's sort of a lot of, and that's okay, right? Like people will reference in a DevOps presentation some interesting, you know, Jevons paradox or this and this and this. But there's very few people that you can grab after the presentation and say, okay, explain to me A, what that is, and B, why it really is relevant to this DevOps conversation. Simon Wardley is one of those people.
Sure,
Mark Burgess is one of those people. And again, not to disrespect anybody else out there, and you are definitely one of those people. Like, in other words, when you see something in your presentation, you like literally, you know, when, you know, now I get paid to ask you these questions, but but when I ask you, you have the sort of the computer scientist's warehouse, if you will. And I guess that one of the things, I guess some of that, but I'm sure it was in your nature anyway, but this idea that you went back to get a degree, a PhD, but it's in design, or you call it, I guess, transition design. So put that all in perspective based on my crazy long question.
Sure. You know, I think, first of all, like, I have always had a strange view of what my role is in communities. I'm often invited into communities as, I like to call myself a critical irritant at times. I often present in communities to push them or to point out concerns I have about kind of directions and things like that. And that often means that I'm not talking to the general audience. I'm talking to a smaller subset of the audience. And I'm really trying to like push on edges of things. And, you know, I'm not always right, but I like pushing on the edges of things and poking at things and being critical of things. And that, as far as like those talks and what drives those talks, as an undergrad, I studied philosophy, and I have been doing reading in philosophy for about 25 years now. And that has taught me a way of thinking where I'm very interested in where ideas come from and tracing the kind of genealogy of these different ideas and how they evolved and why they were important in particular contexts, how the context informed them and stuff like that. And so the result of that is that I tend to spend a lot of time in rabbit holes trying to find interesting ideas. And it's actually like one of my favorite things about talking to you is like you have a very similar kind of interest in history, like your study of Deming and the way that Deming thought is also, I think, driven by like really wanting to understand where do these ideas come from?
Gene, you know, he gives me this compliment, and I think it totally applies to you even at a deeper level. He says that I'm one of the greatest boundary spanners that he knows, right?
That's right.
And for me, I'm not an expert in anything, but I do have this curiosity. And that's why sort of meeting you and then starting, you know, the things that you like, oh my God, I got to look that up, you know, and then I get to ask you questions about it. But you are definitely a boundary spanner.
Yeah, and I think I love that terminology. Boundary spanning is from socio-technical systems theory, which I love. We can go into that at some point too. And I think again, one of the things we'll do the mutual compliment one more time. But one of the things that I love about what you just said is like there's only a couple people who, when I give them things, go, oh, I should actually research this and figure out where it came from. Kat Swittel is another person. Every time I give her something to look at, she goes and figures out where it came from. I love that about I really, really value having relationships where that type of engagement happens. It's super useful, and it seems like a huge privilege. Anyway, so I went back to school. I kind of pointed at it earlier. Like I started my career in software engineering in high school. I programmed. I paid my way through college by programming. So I started hands-on. I programmed JDK1. I think I wrote like a web server in JDK1 because there wasn't a web server available. So we needed to like make one in order to serve pages from it. It was a long time ago. But at the same time, I was studying philosophy, and in college I studied photography. So I have this like really kind of this bridge relationship. I have a technology and design or creativity bridge that I'm always kind of engaged in. And Carnegie Mellon started this new program. I'm in the first cohort, although most everybody else has graduated from the first cohort. I'm the only one left. But I started this program about what's called transition design, and they've recruited me into it because of kind of my public speaking, what I've been talking about in public. And it's trying to ask questions about how does the way that design has kind of been done as a practice, how does it contribute to the unsustainable nature of our current social systems, right? And therefore, what do we need to do to correct the practice of design so it becomes sustainable? And I think, to really quickly just map that onto IT, one is that sounds a lot like technical debt. That sounds a lot like unsustainable software development practices. That sounds a lot like balls of mud. That sounds a lot like a lot of the problems that we really are almost constantly engaged in trying to solve as IT professionals. But also it has the kind of relationship between, the philosophy term would be socio-material, so the social systems and the material systems. And in IT, we would point at the socio-technical systems involved. So how is it that the way that we relate as individuals, teams, and organizations, the social side of it, how is that enabled or disabled or constrained by the technology? And the inverse of that as well. So how does the technology inform the social system? How does the social system inform the technology in a way that we end up being capable of doing certain things and being limited in other ways? And that, to me, ends up being design questions. In other terminology, it would be architectural questions or strategic questions. And I think it's fascinating and very interesting. And the work I do in my PhD is involved in very long timescales, 300, 400, 500-year projects.
Yeah.
But you can't live through one of those projects, unfortunately. But I can take the theories that I'm building there and try to use them to understand and help organizations do the same type of transitions from unsustainable practices to sustainable practices. And that's really, I think, what I'm interested in.
It's really cool. So we've known each other for a few years. I knew Kevin way back when, right? And it used to be me and Kevin, almost every other month we'd have these 2-hour conversations. For some reason, the both of us stopped doing that, and I've always cherished my conversations with Kevin. And I started meeting you in DevOps, and then I'd hear you say something. It's those conversations where you're not really gamifying the conversation, but you're trying to figure out how far you can go with somebody and be actually sort of connecting. And I think my first time I realized, this guy's the real deal on Deming, when I started sort of teasing out some statistical process control and some of the stuff there that very few people really understand, like you had it. Yes. So then, Andrew says, hey, we're going to form this team to come to Red Hat. It's Kevin and Jay. And I'm like, oh man. and I love Andrew. I've learned an incredible amount over the last, 10 or 12 years from Andrew. This is going to be amazing. And then, Andrew's like, well, we're going to, Jabe is sort of our secret weapon, again, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. And, then he's getting a PhD. And it really, up until maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was like, you know what, there's too much on my plate. I'm not even going to look to see what his PhD is about, right? And then we started working on this paper together, which we'll get to. And, I really got the sense of oh, I see where a lot of this is coming from. So I went in and I looked at Carnegie Mellon and I looked at transition design, and I had this sort of aha moment, not an epiphany, not quite, but I remember, there's been a lot of discussions about sort of design in, sort of the DevOps era, right? Sure. And, Jeff Sussner wrote a really good book, Designing Delivery, right? Totally. But in my opinion, and again, this is my sort of, echo chamber view, it's never really stuck to a way that I've seen it. A lot of great stuff in UX, but I don't see it as sort of the, deeply in the bubble of DevOps, right? Yep. And then as we were working on this thing, I looked at transition design and I started thinking about, we'll talk about some of your the ideas I'm really interested in. Is I'm thinking now, because of where we are technology-wise, that actually these principles, it's self-fulfilling, but I do think maybe now is actually the right time to sort of merge those two topics. And really that starts with platforms, and we won't go there just yet.
Yep.
But the idea that the economies of the world, if you go back to the cloud natives, they all grew on platforms.
100%.
I think anybody who's not, if you're paying attention anyhow, anywhere, you have to understand it's about platforms. So I think this idea of that maybe it is the right time to really take a good shot at merging the sort of design theory with the technology stacks that we actually are running today. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I do think so. I mean, so like one of the ways I like to try to explain design to some extent is design is always very concerned with the materials that it's working with. So like if you're making a chair, like a designer cares about like what kind of wood it is. Is it wood? Is it metal? What does leather feel like? What are different types of leather and how do they interact with people? Because they understand that like the chair is a proposition about how to sit, right? It's like a way of being, and it's suggesting to you like you should be like this, right? So that's kind of abstract and philosophical. But let me kind of put it down in a different way. Like platforms are like common places where people work together, and the platform as a set of materials informs the way that you work with each other. That's what it does. That's what a platform does. And therefore, it is a design decision. It's a set of design decisions about how you propose people work together on common things. And therefore, I think it's really critical for people to think about, like, it's not, like if we kind of go rewind a little bit in history, like most software engineering as architecture tends to be about like the maintenance of a particular code base, the maintenance of, or the creation of a system for a team or a small set of teams. But really the platform question has to do with how do I create a place where people can work together and also have their own pieces, right? They have the things they're focused on and the things we're all focused on. And there's a way in which I know through kind of an architectural pattern or design system where my stuff belongs in there. Does it belong in the common area or does it belong in my place? And I think there's some really useful architectural insights from Agile, right? The original kind of emergent architecture ideas, which is kind of like at first, almost everything needs to respond to a customer need. Because if it doesn't, you don't kind of get enough financial draw into the system to actually make it sustainable. So the first part of sustainability is just making something that somebody wants, right? But over time, if you only care directly about that customer interaction and you don't start thinking about like, we have lots of different teams and they're all servicing slightly different customers, but in fact, there are common things that they're doing together. Well, what do we do with that about that commonality? And that ends up being, I think, the question of a platform as opposed to a traditional, like a 3-tier architecture where, you have like, I'm separating the architecture into layers because it makes this application more reliable or more maintainable. As opposed to a platform, I think is asking a different question. It's asking a question about what is common among the teams and how does that work?
And and to sort of summarize, from my understanding, that to me is the convergence, the point of which like we're designed. Now we have something we can run to. The other thing one thing you said is, and I always get in a lot of trouble for this. I said that customer value is overrated, and you sort of alluded to that. Like if you're sort of only sort of objective is customer value, you start losing sight of all these other things. Mark Schwartz has, I love one of his books. It's called The Art of Business Value. Yep. He says it's business value, not customer value, right? Anyway, I just wanted to inject. I think people get like the customer's always right, or well, like if you're a Nordstrom or you're a high-end store, there's certain customers you don't care about them, and so it really is about business value. And there again, I think the platform introduces the possibility to create design patterns, how you aggregate business value.
That's right. And I think that's right. I think like, again, design So if we just stick to like the word design inside software engineering tends to get pushed all the way towards the customer. Like you think about, like you mentioned, UX or, screen design or interface design, stuff like that. And the term maybe architecture maybe means design of the system itself. But also, like, I think in a huge amount of organizations that I work with, architecture has been doubly kind of dinged. And what I mean by that is that, like, Agilists don't like architects. Agilists want to say, make the thing small enough a team can manage it by itself. And I think the answer is, if you want to stay small and you have something that can be that small, maybe that'll work. But on the other hand, most organizations that do kind of, let's say, like they do reasonably well at Agile, don't actually produce well architected systems emergently, because they get focused on customer value too much. They try to increase their velocity too quickly, make big balls of mud, right? The other one is just kind of the enterprise architects in a lot of organizations. Their concept of design has been kind of reduced to approval, right? Yeah. Here's a set of standards and you must implement this reference architecture. And if you're not going to implement this architecture, then your stuff isn't approved, which also isn't really a design paradigm because it has no feedback loops. It doesn't have a way of thinking. And also, frankly, in my experience at least, a lot of those enterprise architects get captured by vendors.
Yeah. And
vendors tell them what to think.
And they're working on, and just, no disrespect to the organizations that have solved this problem, but most that we come across are 25-year mindsets. And this sort of leads to this, speaking of Kevin, the core chronic conflict, which actually comes from Goldratt, his project. And so that is there is that sort of core chronic conflict in IT, which is you sort of the Agilists don't like the architects, right? And the dev didn't like the ops, right? Or ops didn't like dev probably more. And so we always had this sort of bimodal construct, and not in the Gartner sense, but like these sort of the conflict has always been between sort of speed, agility, differentiation, and then sort of, maintain the fort. The architects are about, and like you said, in some ways are really a gating organization.
That's right.
You can't do that because it doesn't fit the prescribed architecture that we designed 20 years ago. But so that's just where I think I really, really have been excited about this notion that you've created, or framework, I don't know what we'll wind up calling it, but the three economies, because I think the beauty of and I want you to explain it, not me, but the thing I like about it is I think we've been stuck in IT in sort of a two economy world, like, the Agilist versus the architects, the dev versus the ops. And even though we've sort of squished dev and ops into this conversation, there's still a missing piece somewhere. That's why SRE exists. It's why, so explain the three economies and sort of where that comes from, how you're thinking about it.
Sure. So I think, the core conflict is a good place to start, right? And the core conflict usually ends up looking something like, we need to create more variation, more versions, more differentiation in order to respond to more and different types of customers. So this is a kind of idea that you have to have lots of feature teams. They have to be producing lots of things. There's all sorts of like interesting ideas in there, like failing fast and like not overproducing, but making sure, but it's always about change, right? So this is kind of like Andrew's wall of confusion argument, right? This is the same kind of thing. One side's focused on change. And then you have ops, right? And ops is always arguing, hey, we need to reduce change because that reduces risk, right? So we need steady kind of state, and steady state is easier and better, right? And so that core conflict in the way that it works inside of Goldratt's frame is to say that it must be an illusion. The argument itself isn't a valid argument, and it's an argument because people haven't thought through how to not have an argument about it, right? One side, it's in his phrasing. It's a zero-sum game. One side has to win, the other side has to lose. And the whole point of dissolving the core conflict is to point out a way of creating a win-win, right? And so the three economies approach to this is to say that there's all sorts of different versions of that one, and a lot of people will say it's cultural, like devs have one culture and ops have another culture, or that people have to have kind of like more empathy, which I don't disagree with, but they need to work with each other more to understand what they're doing. And all those things can be true, but it doesn't really solve the core conflict because of a specific thing, which is as you move up the management stack, eventually you get to almost pure economic rationality. And that just means that someone somewhere is saying, hey, I'm measuring you by specific economic measurements, right? And at the end of the day, operations organizations tend to be managed and evaluated by how much efficiency they're creating, right? So like the great success story of somebody like Google or AWS or SRE in general has to do with the fact that they have decrease the variation of their system enough that they have much higher number of servers under each human that's running them, right? So basically that's an efficiency. It's very hard to compete with those people directly because they are so efficient at managing. Start in Agile, and I usually say the pain point here is like someone says, hey, I need new customers. I need to satisfy my customers more. I need to interact with the market more. I need to produce more different stuff in the market, right? And you often hear it like it's not fast. We're not fast enough, or we can't produce enough. And so this set of kind of theory about the economic value of production, the people doing that type of work, is that they're creating differentiation in the market, right? So like actually what they're saying is I need to produce something that differentiates me from my competitor, because otherwise why would people buy me, right? So that is entirely an economics of differentiation, and that requires an increase in variation, right? And I'm trying to keep the 4L language correct here, do my best. So the question is like, how do you actually solve for that problem, right? Like, how do you actually dissolve that? And the answer is that there's a third economy that you can create. That third economy is what I call the economy of scope. And the economy of scope simply says that, well, if we look at what's happening in an efficiency economy, what we're trying to do in an efficiency economy is we're trying to reproduce things at a lower cost. So we're trying to reproduce compute and network and things like this.
You call that a scale economy, right?
That's a scale economy, right? So what we want to do is be able to reproduce it. But the interesting thing about that is that the way that the importance of an efficiency economy or a scale economy is that it has to be governed, because the things inside of it can be consumed. So when you think about this, what I'm saying is like, you can't just let anyone run anything on your network. Right. You can't just let any code execute on your CPU compute pool, because it might run away and consume all the CPU compute. And that means that everybody else is on that CPU compute pool also gets punished by it, right? So you have to constrain it in a way. And so that constraint, the way that is governed in a lot of ways, is literally limitations on what the software engineer is allowed to do, right? And that's interesting and useful and important to know that in order to create efficiencies, you do need to have certain constraints, right? On the other hand, there's stuff inside of most organizations that doesn't get consumed in use. So it doesn't go away when people use it. In fact, it gains value when people use it. Mm-hmm. And this is what we call the economy of scope. And so things like data. So you can think of it like if you had, let's say you have like 5 or 6 different business lines. Some of them you have gotten because you acquired another business. Some of them have sprouted up various ways. But as a result of pursuing kind of an emergent architecture approach with acquisition and divestiture, you end up with like 5 or 6 different ways of having a customer record, like just who the customer is. And so now when someone wants to say like, who is our customers across all the business lines, becomes very difficult to answer, right? Now, on the other hand, some sort of like common customer record where everyone kind of contributes to it from their various things, and then they build their small applications on top of this common base. That means that every time someone updates customer information, it all updates everywhere else. So it's gaining in value by having more people use it, right? That's one example. Functionality can be like this. Common patterns, like ways of deploying software that are more or less reliable. All those things, the more people that do them, the better it is for everybody in the organization. It doesn't go away, it gains in value. And so when we talk about platforms, one of the things we can talk about is the idea that a platform is essentially an implementation of a scope economy. It's not an implementation of an efficiency economy or a scale economy. And it's not an implementation of differentiation economy. It is its own thing. And so we end up having this kind of three things really quickly. Differentiation is about customer value that's created by creating new functions and features that the customer values. And efficiency is about recreating consumable parts of the organization as efficiently as possible. And scope is about accelerating the adoption of things that allow both of those other economies to function, right? So in other words, a good scope economy, a platform, does two things. It accelerates differentiation of customer value, and it reduces variation going into your scale economy. Yeah. And so it acts like a clutch. So in Andrew's original version of the picture, there's a wall in between, but I like to think of it as actually a set of gears not working, like you're grinding. And the scope economy is literally a clutch that fits between the two that makes allows both of the rotational movement of both sides to synchronize and work.
You know, I was telling a friend of mine who's been at IT for about 10 years now, and he's a friend of mine. We started business years ago. I was explaining to him what I was working on, and he said it sounded to him like a carburetor, right? Which I thought was interesting, right? Like you get the gas and the oxygen. In the end, you get this. I think the thing that, I've told you this, and, Mark Burgess wrote the forward to the SRE book. So Mark Burgess, who really invented infrastructure as code as a whole space, was the original author of CF Engine. He said to me one time in a conversation, he said, one of the things that Google did that was I think he said brilliant. He says he doesn't think he said brilliant, but is that they made a non-deterministic infrastructure look deterministic to the software developers. Right. And to me, that, I think Google, they didn't call it a scope economy, but I think 10 years ago when they were starting off with their platform, the Borg, eventually became open sourced as Kubernetes. I think that they saw that, and one of the things, I don't know, it was you or Andrew came up with this idea of, instead of a platform as a service, we think of it as a platform as an interface. What Google did really early on is said, you know what, I'm going to let the developers just develop.
That's right.
And I'm going to give them abstract, they're not going to have to know anything about what type of storage device. It's either, a block storage or it's a blob storage. It's a, BigQuery. They just create all those things as abstractions that the platform arbitrated. And
That's
so
right.
they moved as much as they could out of the developer's responsibility into the platform, and basically pushed in all the things that sort of the scale economy, the operations, the architectures need to have in this sort of middle machine, if you will, that sort of does that. And I think that's the missing piece. When you talk about design, how do you design? When we talk about platforms, and we talk about scope economy, and even if we talk about SRE is a social. The thing people don't understand about SRE is you honestly can't do SRE unless you have a platform. It doesn't make any sense. If you're going to arbitrate, SLOs and SLIs against something, they have to be bounded by I don't see how it's even feasible to do. But this way, Google didn't do it without a platform.
I think
it
that's
has to be a platform.
I think it's at least got to be an interface layer, like we're talking about.
Right, an interface, right?
And I think a platform is exactly what you would call that thing.
I got a better name for it out there. Let us know, but like we're going to call it a platform.
I do. I mean, I love this idea of platform as interface as opposed to platform as a service. The way I tend to think of a platform as a service is the platform as a service to me feels like the traditional relationship between dev and ops, right? Like it's a thing where you say, the platform is where the ops people define a set of running stuff and they take all the risk on for running that stuff. That's what a service generally is, right? The ITIL version of service definitions are, well-defined. If you use it in this particular way, I can guarantee this particular level of service, right? I'm going to take the risk on so you don't have to. But I think the difference between that and a platform as an interface is to say that the point is not to de-risk the developers at all. The point is to abstract away the underlying infrastructure. And like I think one of the things that drives me crazy, and one of the reasons why I started kind of trying to explain what I meant by this like three economies idea that I had in my head, was this conversation I'd have all the time with Kevin, where you'd say like, it's really weird that everybody thinks like, I think people's common pattern, and you get it in bimodal a lot, right? Like there's a fast part of the company and there's a slow part of the company, right? And the thing that's totally crazy to me about that is like, right, like a software developer, like even like a really high performing software developer at like Facebook or whatever, like, who can do like 10 deploys a day or something like that. That means that like, the speed at which they're working is like every hour or two they're writing a little bit of code and deploying it. Operators work at much higher speed than that. I mean, they close, they have a flow of tickets that most developers would never be able to comprehend. So like, it's kind of crazy to think like that. So I kept on thinking like there's this problem about the idea of the cycle time in the different parts of the organization. And so one of the things about the platform as interface is to think of it really simply as what drives the cycle time in differentiation and what drives the cycle time in operations, right? And I think the answer is like interesting in operations, because what does Google do? Well, they move from these like large scale infrastructures like, mainframe or E10,000 Sun server type infrastructures, right? Where the answer is you buy this one giant thing, and then that is the source of stability, right? The source of stability is that you have a large machine or a set of large machines that you're going to run for like 10, 20 years, right? And that establishes, so the cycle time there is quite slow. But Google goes, wait, there's got to be another way to solve this problem. And they go to commodity-based hardware where they say, there's this really interesting thing, which is Moore's Law. And it says that every year we should replace a lot of our infrastructure, especially if we care about things like power consumption, the heat that is produced by power consumption, all this stuff. Well, every year we could get an efficiency on that, but only if we can actually replace the hardware. So we need an abstraction layer between what the developers are doing and the cycle time of hardware replacement. And what you see in organizations that I think, what you see in organizations that don't have platform as an interface is that you get developers writing code that relies on low-level infrastructure.
We see this all the time. Yeah, we see this with even Amazon using services in Amazon. And I don't know what, again, everybody has to take their own paved road, right?
That's right. Yep.
So I'm to sit here and say, you're wrong, you're right, right? That's wrong. Yep. But it's interesting. I think the whole idea of this whole idea, like, there's always a rub, right? Like if you're willing to piece apart, dev and ops is like awesome until you hit some level of scale.
That's right.
That you put the microscope on it. There's a gap. And then so SRE has been sort of an answer to that gap, but that's an overlay. But without a platform or a scope economy.
Yep.
That falls apart. The whole reason, I remember having a conversation with Kelsey one time, and Kelsey is originally from Atlanta, and every once in a while I get to spend, a long lunch with him over the holidays. And we had this great conversation where, there's sort of the nirvana state of SRE. So when we talk about scope economy and platform SRE, to us, it's the same thing, right? And, in fact, the technical part is the platform. The socio is the SRE SLO contract. But, one of the things I had this epiphany is, as I was trying to ask them dumb questions, I came to this conclusion is what you're saying is, maybe you're the service team and I'm SRE. So you come to me and say, John, here's my service. And by the way, you do have to have all the componentry. Like you need ops, I expect that your service team is sort of two-pizza team-ish, right? You're not just a bunch of developers. You solve the operational stuff, but you still come to me and say, here's what it is. I look at it and I say, no, you got to clean this up a little bit. You come back. I say, all right, I'm going to give you guarantee a three or sort of an SLO, which isn't a guarantee. It's an arbitrage, error budgeting, but of 3 nines, and then you're going to pay me this much. And then you say to me, okay, John, are you going to use Amazon or Google? Are you going to use DynamoDB? And like, no, you don't get to answer that question.
That's right. Yeah.
It's mouse and a round wheel. Like, as long as I hit as long as you pay me what you owe me, and I hit your SLO, like, and why do you really actually want to know?
Yep.
But you don't get that without a platform. And I think that's the thing I think that most people, even when you start talking about two pizza teams and build run teams, like if that's the only conversation, there's a great book, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, called Team Topologies.
Yeah.
They talk about cognitive load. Like, so there's a point at which you've got too much cognitive load, even in that two pizza team, where you say, okay, well, I guess we do have to sort of split out the directory management services as a different, and at the end of the day, all of that gets sort of not, solved, but is the design pattern of a platform or a scope economy addresses all those issues.
I think that's right. Yeah. And I do think there's like an order of precedence problem, and that people don't always get. Like, SRE doesn't create reliability. SREs have a reliable platform, and therefore they won't let you put unreliable code on it.
That even I'm saying duh to myself, right? Like, yes, of course. That was the point you made earlier. At some scale, now you have, when you're just a small organization and you're trying to do really fast and get customers and add customers, that's great. But at some point that flips to, like you said, an economy of efficiencies where you owe your clients that scale economy contract. To your point, then SRE is about like protecting not just does the server go down, it's protecting our business in our contract to our actual customers.
And in a way, like, again, I'll try not to be like massively overly philosophical about this, but traditional architectures tend to think at part levels. And what I mean by that is they think that, the best, most reliable, most resilient architecture would be custom to a particular application, right? And SRE flips that on its head, and platforms flip that on the head by saying, actually, no, aggregates of unreliable parts at large scales produce more resilience than custom architectures.
Well, with a couple of minutes that we sort of have left, I definitely want to do this again, because I do want to get into, in early when I talked about, I love that you're one of the few people that can talk about a computer science principle and then actually explain it and then tie it into platforms. But so there's a bunch I was going to hit on. We don't have time, but you talk a lot about Ashby's law and why that is important to understand what that is and why it applies to scope economy and why people should think about it in terms of platforms.
Yeah. So Ashby's law is interesting. It's what's called the law of requisite variety. And what it says is this, the one that I tend to use is like a thermostat, right? So a thermostat works like this. You have one register, the ideal temperature, and then you have a measure of the current temperature. You compare those two things, and then you turn the furnace on or the air conditioner on to achieve the ideal state. So you have one thing that you're measuring. And so the complexity of the system's relationship to the environment is only its relationship to the temperature. Now, you go out and buy a Nest, and there's a small computer in there, and the reason why there's a small computer in there is because it is going to use multiple variables, like Is it sunny outside? What's the outside temperature? What's the inside temperature? Is there somebody in the house? What time of day it is? All those things. All of those mean that it has a far more complex interaction with the environment. And the result of the complex interaction with the environment is actually makes a much more efficient use of the furnace. Yeah. So by being more sensitive to multiple perspectives in the environment, it actually works better, right? And another version of this, really quickly, if you and I do fencing like with swords, if I know 3 thrusts and you know 3 parries, like there's a thrust parry relationship, and we have a competition, it will roughly be a coin flip because no one has the advantage. However, if I learn a new thrust and you don't learn a new parry to work against it, then I'll win every time, right? So Ashby's law basically says the more complex the environment you want to address, the more internal complexity the system needs, right? So any organization sees this, right? Like the more customers they have and the more different types of customers they have, the more complex the systems they have to manage the relationships with those customers, right?
And for me, tying that back to the scope economy and sort of differentiation scale, or if you want to call it DevOps, right? It is, that parry thrust example is that you have to balance the controllers have to be equal or greater than
that's right.
Controlling.
That's right.
And those are always moving. Like somebody is always getting more thrusts or more parries.
That's right.
It's the scope economy in a complex system that's constantly clutch or carbureting. How much gas comes in and how much oxygen you take to get the right.
That's right. And really, like part of it is to think of it as the 3 economies. If you think of it kind of as a whole system, what it's asking management to do is to understand that all systems have a certain amount of variation they can sustain before they collapse, right? Like this is kind of like traditional lean style thinking. Like quality is defined by being able to actually create something with a consistency, limited variation, so that you don't get like screws that don't fit the bolts anymore, right? So we all understand like there's a certain stability. Like if you push the system too far, it will collapse, right? Or you won't be able to afford being able to sustain variation. So then the question ends up being like less the traditional Ashby version, which is like there's the outside and the inside. It becomes, okay, we have variation in the system. Where should we invest the variation?
That's right.
And the answer ends up being, oh, wait, what we should do is basically squeeze the variation out of the back end of the system, which results in a reduction of variability at the scale economy. Mm-hmm. Push some of that into the scope economy, and that scope economy ends up being the relationship that reduces variation, therefore allowing people to reduce variation in the back end. And you push it all the way as closest to the front as possible, so that you're basically investing all of the variation, which has a cost, as close to the customer as possible, right, and reducing as much variation in the back that reduces the variability of response.
It's one of the things I thought was really interesting. You saw I've done a fair amount of research on sort of toy supply chain for VM. We won't go into that. Yep. This is cost control, common cause variation. Yep. What I sort of learned in the last couple of weeks from you is, and I won't use the words because we'll have to save that for another, but I didn't realize that it really is, from a scope economy view, is you're actually trying to expand
That's right.
the variability to the right tolerance level. Right? Which is, that was so awesome for me to realize. I always think about variance as reductionist always, but it really is in sort of in a world where you're trying to serve these core chronic conflicts. It's about the actual scope economy, finding out the limits.
That's right.
Of how far it can go for variation, so it can tolerate bites. So yeah, no, it's we will do this again.
Yeah.
And we'll be going to be blogging and writing papers on this, and so stay tuned. We got a lot of good stuff. Andrews and Kevin, we're between the 4 of us. I really think we're producing some pretty good stuff. So
cool.
Well, thank you, sir.
I look forward to talking and continuing the conversation.
Yeah, man. All right.
Cool.
Right now, software is more important than ever. It is powering the online services enabling teams to connect, collaborate, and work remotely, and allowing innovation to continue to get to market rapidly. CloudBees offers software delivery automation solutions to support all remote teams, and you can use the best-in-class tools you need to get the job done. CloudBees helps you build stuff that matters. Visit cloudbees.com to learn more.
Hey, thanks, John, and many thanks to Jabe for sitting down with John for that conversation. You know, if you haven't had a chance to catch the last 3 or 4 Tuesdays in a row where John has spoken with Kevin Baer and Jay Bloom and Andrew Clay Schaefer and some others, you know, John's just been having some great conversations, man. Don't miss out. You can always go back and watch those on demand. They're on every Tuesday. And John, of course, will be on next Tuesday with another great one. For now, though, it's that time where we're going to turn things over to our managing editor, Charlene O'Hanlon. And Charlene has 2 good interviews today, one with Ben Siegelman, CEO of Lightstep, and with Jonathan Hunt, GitLab VP of Security. So let's head over to Charlene O'Hanlon.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I am so thrilled now to have with me Ben Siegelman, who is he's a former senior software engineer at Google and the current CEO of Lightstep. Ben, thanks so much for taking some time and talking with me today.
My pleasure.
Great. So I'd like to have a kind of a general conversation about how cloud providers are faring as more people are working from home and logging onto the internet, and how they're basically handling that influx of data, that traffic that's running through their systems. But before we get started, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about Lightstep.
Sure. Lightstep is an observability platform for large software applications, the kinds of things that I think are actually growing in importance during the shelter-in-place time. You know, a lot of our customers are, Twilio and GitHub and Lyft and Under Armour and companies like that have been doing a lot in the digital space, and they use Lightstep to help their own development teams and operational teams keep their software reliable and performant.
Okay. All right. Great. So then let's dive right into the kind of cloud provider perspective when it comes to traffic in light of the COVID. I think I saw a statistic actually that you sent over to me that that overall traffic volume has increased by as much as 50% in some regions. Is that right?
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. The traffic volumes, especially throughout March and into April, as shelter-in-place orders were coming into effect, were quite regionalized. Like the change in areas where there has been a shelter-in-place order is much more pronounced than places where there hasn't. I think the explanation there is pretty obvious. Mm-hmm. And the traffic type, internet traffic is not all the same, right? There's traffic that's for streaming video, and then traffic that's for other lower latency applications, and a lot of the traffic has been focused on streaming. I think whether it's Zoom interviews like this one, and we're sharing that bandwidth with Netflix, and also with lower latency collaboration applications. So the traffic it varies by type, but we have the overall internet traffic volumes have increased substantially in the regions that have been affected. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I think about just the amount of streaming that's happening in my home on a daily basis now, between these interviews and the conference calls that we have to do, and then my son's online learning. So there's a whole lot of streaming going on here for sure.
Yeah.
So, if you think about just my household and the amount of streams I have going on at any time, and you kind of multiply that by the number of households, even my little town, but it seems like we're well beyond maybe even the 50% increase. So how much becomes too much for these cloud services providers?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I think about we're talking about things that are obviously very complicated and have many layers.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I think of it is that you have really like 3 layers that matter in terms of reliable services. One is the internet itself, the actual network.
Mm-hmm.
The next is the cloud providers that it's of course not required, but many of the applications we depend on are now hosted within Amazon or Google or Azure's cloud, right? And then you have those applications themselves, and you have these 3 different pieces. And if any one of them breaks, then the whole thing breaks, right? So you have all of them need to be behaving well. The internet itself, I'll start there. I think it's kind of fascinating. We've obviously been testing the internet, and it's become an increasingly important part of our lives over the past several decades. But this crisis that we're going through as a species, I think, is by far the most important test we've had of it, and that the commerce, which, it's not just about making people money, it's about employing people, which is obviously gravely at risk right now, is held up and propped up in many ways by the internet. And the internet's success is crucial to our overall ability to function as like a global economy. So this is by far the strongest test we've ever had of the internet. Of course, when it was designed in the 60s, at that point it was called ARPANET. It was actually designed to withstand. It was the purpose of it from the military was to withstand potential, regional collapse of infrastructure, most likely caused by a nuclear war. Frankly, like it was meant to withstand that kind of impact. This is a different kind of impact, obviously. I don't think that people in the 60s were thinking about folks streaming Netflix, but there actually are some similarities in that the internet was designed to degrade gracefully. And I think what we've seen is, I don't know if people are aware of this or if they're noticing it or not, but Netflix is probably degrading to 720p or something like that instead of HD. And you're kind of like, okay, whatever. But the internet is actually doing its job. It's designed to be able to prioritize different types of traffic. And so although I think we've exceeded at some level in certain areas, I think we've actually exceeded the planned capacity. The networks are doing what they're supposed to do, and they're degrading gracefully. And our applications are also degrading gracefully. So you can still watch Netflix, it's just maybe not quite as many pixels. So in some ways, that's actually working exactly as designed. And what you want to see in a computing system is that kind of graceful degradation. The frightening thing is when you hit max capacity and then it just completely falls over. So I think the internet's doing a great job. The cloud providers also had some buffer and some max capacity that they built in as well. I've heard stories here and there. I mean, I don't speak for Google or Amazon or any of them, but there are instances where certain regions are having some provisioning issues. But overall, I think that the cloud providers have managed to weather the storm through spare capacity of their own. And then the last piece is the applications themselves that are maybe hosted on Google and Amazon, but are actually written and run by these various organizations, whether that be Zoom or Netflix or whatever. Those applications, I think, it's variable. I think that there are places where they were already experiencing such network effects that the increase in their traffic has been manageable. And then there are other things like e-learning platforms, like, you were mentioning your son. My daughter is also involved in a bunch of e-learning, and I don't want this to sound slanderous, so I'm not going to name names. I actually sympathize with them, but this poor e-learning platform probably just saw an 100x increase in load in the span of a couple of weeks, and it's not very reliable, I'll tell you that. And it's difficult for people writing those applications to plan for that kind of change. When you're writing software, you expect things, maybe if you have a good year, you'll see a 10x increase in a year. You don't plan on a 100x increase in the span of a couple of weeks. And I think for applications that are particularly well suited to these times, that's a lot of entertainment, a lot of collaboration, some e-learning. We've seen instability in those applications. It's not due to the internet or cloud providers, though. It's actually just due to the applications themselves needing to scale by orders of magnitude in just a couple of weeks. And it's very difficult to as a software engineer to plan for that kind of change.
So two questions come to mind. First of all, do you think that this level is sustainable for the cloud providers? I mean, how much becomes too much? And then the other question is, do we need to maybe rethink the way applications are being developed to kind of factor in a level of robustness that didn't ever really have to be there before?
Yeah, those are both excellent questions. The first one, I think it probably is. The probably around the sustainability has to do with supply chains and things like that, right? It's like the supply chain, the cloud is obviously not actually in the cloud. It's in a bunch of giant buildings with tons of computers in them. And I think we do need the supply chains for additional hardware to be healthy enough to create more computers, right? I think that we've already seen a big uptick, and the cloud providers have managed to survive that. So I'd expect that they'll be okay. I think what could be dangerous is that they're unable to add computing capacity at the rate that they need to. I do recall a time when I was at Google I was at Google from 2003 until 2012. And there were times when we needed to build more hardware, and we weren't cost constrained, but we were actually, it was more constrained by just the actual availability of resources and supply chains. So I think this gets into geopolitics and things that I don't have any particular inside awareness of, but I would be looking more towards the health of the semiconductor supply chains than towards the health of the cloud providers in terms of their ability to weather this for the next. Let's imagine that we're in I of course for personal reasons and for other reasons hope this isn't the case, but if we're in some kind of work from home situation for another year, I think they will need to add a lot of capacity. And that comes down to their ability to build hardware, I think. And they're by far the largest computer manufacturers in the world are Amazon and Google and Facebook, right? It's not actually Dell that's making most of the computers anymore. So that's my take on that. As far as the people who are building and running these applications, I think the trouble is that I think to someone who's using these applications, you imagine that there's a correct way and an incorrect way to build a piece of software. And of course, when you are using a mobile app and it crashes, well, that was incorrect. And it's very binary. In reality, it's nothing like that. I think most software, when it's running in production, especially under very heavy load, the ways that will bend and break are incredibly difficult to predict and have to do with the interactions of many components that actually have some kind of unknown breaking point. I would call it sort of an invisible asymptote where something starts getting worse and worse, and you don't really know exactly when it's going to break until it does. And it's almost impossible as a software engineer to predict those things. And to be able to respond to those things dynamically is essential to not just the operations teams, but the entire development organizations. Their ability to weather the storm has to do with their ability to predict and respond to these sorts of failures before they're profound user-affecting outages. Of course, I'm at some level biased in this because that's what my company does all the time. But it is a really, really important capability. And the companies that have been most successful in weathering this are all, I think, non-coincidentally, are the ones that have the ability to understand their systems and to see smoke before fire. And that's a matter of having appropriate tooling. It's not just a matter of having brilliant software engineers.
All right, great. So, obviously there's, we're kind of hearing, little rumors here and there about, well, not even rumors, but buzzes that, remote work could be kind of the new norm, whether it's full-time or part-time. So obviously, organizations are going to need to adapt their infrastructure to accommodate this. We used to hear like, you need to move to a digital infrastructure so that you could be more productive and more competitive, and, you can, create a better customer experience. But now it almost sounds like you need to build a digital infrastructure so that you can survive, basically. You need to be able to handle this load of traffic. So, Am I hearing this right? I mean, have we kind of shifted that whole conversation about digital transformation? Has it become kind of a survival mode, if you will?
Certainly feels that way, I think, at the moment. I mean, I think as much as we try to be intelligent, rational beings at some level, I think it's hard to escape your current reality. And since no one has an end date on this world that we're in, it certainly feels that way. And I think even if we get out of this, I'm absolutely positive that a big portion of our society, certainly including me, will have some PTSD around all this. Mm-hmm. And at least understanding that you have the optionality to exist in this kind of world is going to feel somewhat mandatory. Yeah. And I also think you can look, today I was just looking at the news and I saw that Twilio reported earnings and their stock went up by 50% today, or maybe it was 40%, some huge uptick because they had an incredible quarter in Q1 and they're very bullish on their future, which I think is just a sign that if you're actually really able to tap into the digital economy, which, of course, Twilio is right at the heart of that, you can do extremely well as a business. And needless to say, there aren't a lot of areas of the economy right now where people are just killing it, right? So I think there's also a recognition that digital businesses are probably the healthiest businesses to be in during times like these. I think it's making it's in the last 10 years of a bull market. I think there's been a rising tide in general, of course, with some exceptions. But I think now that we're probably staring down at least a couple of years of much more difficult economic times generally, I think there's a recognition that digital businesses are going to be the ones that are able to continue to grow through this, and that's going to be a necessity, I think, for folks that are trying to build like an enduring company of their own. So.
All right, great. So I guess my last question is, what do you think the future of work from home is going to be in light of everything that's happened?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that a lot of folks, I'm a CEO of this company and we've been thinking about remote work for a long time. And a couple of years ago, we certainly embraced it to a certain extent. And if people want to work remotely, that's fine. We didn't put a cap on it or anything. But then a lot of people, I think we've been going to the office our whole lives and enjoy that and continue to do that. And then, of course, we were forced into this new mode. And of course, there have been some things that are more challenging, but other things have actually been really nice and really easy. And I know that a lot of other organizations have seen similar things. What I'm expecting is that for jobs where physical interaction isn't just necessary. I mean, of course, I don't think work from home is going to work for a barber, right? But for jobs where it can be done virtually, I think that you're going to see a lot more openness to that. And a recognition that in some ways it's actually, as long as the employee is happier in that configuration, it's better in a lot of ways for the business as well. I think that this change it's remarkable. We had longstanding complaints that maybe there are a few too many meetings per capita at my company. Those things corrected themselves very quickly because you don't want to sit through unnecessary Zoom meetings. It's just not that fun, right? So I think it's in some ways it's actually really healthy for the culture of a company. So yeah, my expectation is that there used to be a lot of skepticism of work from home, but I think now that everyone's been forced to do it, we can see that there are many benefits to it as well. And I think people, I expect that most organizations or at least progressive organizations will embrace work from home in a unqualified way as an option for their employees. Although I think there are other folks who still swear by the virtues of just going to an office and separating their life into, not blending work and home too permissively. And so I don't think this is going to be like the death of the American office or something. I think a lot of folks still prefer that, myself included, actually.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're going to see that hybrid solution for a while. But speaking as a full-time work from home employee, I will say actually my life has been disrupted a whole lot more by this COVID crisis than perhaps other people might have thought. But that's another
parenting is a different story. Having schools being closed, the no schooling thing is far more disruptive than work from home for most families with kids, and that's a different story. If that continues, then I don't know, man. It's going to be a wild ride. So
it's a whole other ballgame then. Absolutely. I agree 100%. So, but Ben, thank you very much for your conversation. You have provided some much needed insight. So I really do appreciate your expertise. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, stick around. We've got more TechStrong TV coming up, so please stay tuned.
Hey everyone, Alan Schimmel, CEO, founder of MediaOps here. I want to personally invite you to join us on June 4th for 12 hours strong of TechStrong. TechStrong Con is our conference that we're putting together. You know, the tech industry is so built, and it was such an integral piece of our existence and identity of going to so many conferences, communicating, collaborating, networking, seeing your friends in the industries, your peers. And, you know, just because we can't get together in person anymore, we can certainly do it virtually. We've been doing virtual events at MediaOps for 2 years. We think we've got them down. It's, you know, it's a really immersive experience. But what I'm really excited about with TechStrong is, you know, my friend John Willis, my partner in Digital Anarchist, John's put together an amazing lineup of speakers. I think unlike any you've seen at a virtual DevOps, cloud native, DevSecOps, or cybersecurity related conference before. Check it out. Go to techstrongcon.com. Registration, attendance is free, but space is limited. We hope to see you there. It's 12 hours all day, June 4th. techstrongcon.com. Stay well, stay healthy, stay strong. TechStrong.
This is Digital Anarchist at RSA San Francisco 2020.
Hi, everybody. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at MediaOps, which produces DevOps.com, Container Journal, Security Boulevard, and Digital Anarchist Media Platform. We are day 2 of RSA 2020. The theme this year is human element. Lots of interesting conversations around that, but I'm about to have another very interesting conversation with Peter Danhue, who is the CEO and co-founder of Secure Code Warrior. That's easy for me to say. How are you?
Good, thank you very much, Charlie. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. So, how's the show for you?
Really busy.
Yeah.
It's really exciting because the human element, development, I think they're very much related. So yeah, it's been absolutely fantastic for us.
Excellent, excellent. Why don't we start by you telling me just a little bit about your company?
Absolutely. We're Secure Code Warrior. We basically try to help developers to write secure code from the start.
Okay.
We try to give them knowledge and skills in their specific coding language. So whether they are COBOL or Node.js or mobile developers, we try to kind of teach them using gamification and hands-on exercises. And then we basically have built tools that integrate with their processes, with their environments, to kind of coach them on the fly on security topics.
Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't. So it's kind of learning, real-time learning, if you will.
Yes, we're trying to kind of address where data breaches are being born. Basically, is with the code, with the developer, and we're trying to kind of address them while they're kind of building code.
Huh. Interesting. Interesting. So. Let's talk DevSecOps, because obviously it's something that your organization is very deeply involved in, and you know, I've noticed that over the course of the conversations that I'm having this year, DevSecOps is pretty high on the list for a lot of organizations. So, what are you seeing in the space as far as adoption of DevSecOps practices, and is it a surprise to you?
So I think it is a great evolution, I would call it, because in the past we had security people on the left, we had developers on the right, operations somewhere in between, and I think now we see these things coming together.
Okay.
And I think it's important that these people start speaking the same language, using the same terminology, and start using tools that kind of try and solve these kind of problems. Because I think if you look back in the last 10 to 20 years, security has always spoken a different language. They have pushed some tools to developers, which has not always been accepted or absorbed by some of those developers. So I think with DevSecOps it kind of comes all together, where we're kind of building tools that help developer produce better and more secure code.
I was having a conversation earlier today with somebody else, and we were talking about DevSecOps and kind of the blending, if you will, of development and security operations, and how the traditionally security has kind of been thought of as the department of no.
Yes.
And developers are, they're like, I don't want to deal with security because they're going to tell me no, and I can't do it, and that's going to help. That's not going to help me in my job. So, what do you think is changing in that that mindset that's kind of enabling more DevSecOps
So
practices?
I'll be honest, I was a security.
Oh, well then you were a no man then, huh?
No man years and years ago, and I was the one that basically broke into the systems and pointed out, you're doing this bad, but I never knew how to fix it, because security people don't know how to write code and how to develop code. And I think because we're seeing that whatever security has been doing isn't really helping, because saying no or slowing them down or not helping them solve the issue and only pointing them out is not really enabling the developer or empowering them. And I see that changing. Over the last few years, security people are reaching out to developers and saying, hey, we're going to stop saying no, and we're going to try and enable you to keep the pace of development and keep the speed and not slow you down with our tools and our processes, and we're going to try and help you. And I think which is a great evolution, and I think it's going to further kind of blend together, where I think in a few years security will probably be part of development, and AppSec will be done by the developer itself rather than security teams.
So I kind of see this blending, if you will, of the developer and the security into kind of one role. And I'm hearing now about a lot of security folks who actually are getting into the code, and they're learning how to do it, and they're understanding what developers have to go through. And then in turn, I think developers are taking a kinder eye, if you will, towards security, because they understand that they have a job to do as well. And but now, because security does understand what they're going through, maybe they can actually speak the same language.
Absolutely, I think that is key. That is key, that they use the same terminology. Security is learning about development, and development is learning about security, and you do see that blend, and they are going to come together, which I think how it should be. Like applying security practices should be everyone's job, not only the security team. And I think developers will take ownership and responsibility, and being proud that their code can't be hacked into. And I think that's kind of where we're going, which is exciting.
I think security is one of those things it's kind of like DevOps. It's never going to be done. We're never going to reach an end point. So do you think that we're always going to have a bit of a struggle, if you will, between security and IT, or security and DevOps? And
I think you're right. We're never going to make every single developer a security expert. I think we shouldn't try that either. But if we give them the right fundamentals, the basics, that they know how to avoid the most common mistakes, I think that would help a lot to kind of bring those two together. But you will still have the security people that are going to find weaknesses and design flaws and basically execute upon their job of finding really hard problems. While now I think 80% of the time of a security person is spent on things that are very old, very basic, just hygiene stuff that we should have solved 10 to 15 years ago.
Right.
So I do think security is going to stay there and focus on the really advanced stuff, but developers are going to learn more about the fundamentals of secure coding.
So what about something like, I don't know, open source code that's being reused? I mean, we hear about that all the time, and that was actually a big topic last year at RSA. So do you think that the market is, or the industry has kind of maybe gotten wise to the idea that maybe reusing that code, from a cyber hygiene perspective isn't the best idea, or are they kind of doing things to wash it?
Well, I think we all acknowledge that sometimes it's not a good idea to just reuse code from somebody on the internet published.
Right.
And I think we are building technology that can help us with that. I think Snyk is a good example of a company that does that. But do I think that the developers won't use those modules because of security? At the moment, no. But I think you're pointing out a really core problem, is that there's 25 million developers out there, a lot of students that are graduating in software engineering, and that's where we need to start addressing the security basic hygiene problem. And we need to make sure that these people that are writing that open source code in their free time that they basically know about these basic things.
And that I would imagine includes, updating the kernel and things like that, like, with the Equifax data breach, and it was just an Apache, was it a Apache struts problem issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, sorry. It seems to me that we're getting to a point now where people are starting to understand that there are these basic problems that need to be overcome, especially when it comes to DevSecOps. And I like to see the direction that we're heading right now. But I wonder, are we moving fast enough, do you think? Are we moving too fast? Are we moving too slow?
Seeing the amount of breaches that are still happening every single week, we could probably move a little bit faster. I think it would be great if our university systems are starting to put security into their course material, which I think many of them have not yet done that.
Right.
But that's going to address the core problem. Also, companies hiring new developers should do some basic validation or checks that the developer knows these basic hygiene stuff, because that's where you want to address the problem. And I think we haven't made much progress, I think, on that front, so we could move a little bit faster there as well, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, crystal ball time. A year from now, what are we going to be talking about, you think?
I think we'll still be talking about the human element, because I think a lot of security comes back to the human and how aware they are about the problems, because I don't think developers do this intentionally. They don't intentionally write insecure code, but it all comes back around awareness and understanding and a common language.
Okay. All right. Well, Peter, thank you so much for having the conversation with me. Really great stuff. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me.
Guys, lots more interviews to come, so please stick around on the Digital Anarchist Network. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Charlene. Those were two good ones. As I said, I think today's show's just it had the potential to be a great show, and it certainly is. Next, we're going to go over to the analyst corner with Mitch. Mitchell Ashley has some sage words he'll share with us and some keen insight. Mitchell, take it away.
We often talk about how unusual our current circumstances are. And not to speak of the tragedy part of it, which of course is extremely important, but the impact on our economy, much talked about in the press and in the media. But what's inside of that? What's happening? And what's interesting to me is that, I often equate to what are past experiences, and there's certainly some things that are very relevant to that. But I also see this as a very different kind of situation, and for the following reasons. If it was strictly an economic impact, there was a downturn, the banking crisis, there was something like that, really driving our financials down, it would create really some gaps or places in our economy that just are not functioning properly. What's not functioning properly is consumers and consumer spend right now because of the stay-at-home policies and the impact on unemployment, especially for folks in the service economies. What's interesting, though, is the patterns that I see with companies that are operating in the technology space are still very much active, going. I don't know if I would say healthy, but there's a lot of activity still happening where normally you would see marketing budgets slashed, IT budgets slashed, things like that. So I guess the message is, don't think the new normal will be even normal. I think it's going to be, and is already, very unusual. If you think about just the normal pattern of behavior, oftentimes third quarter is the drop. We see drops in sales, folks going on vacation, unavailability of people just because they're out and about with family. Other plans are going on, especially internationally, Europe and others. This year, I'm not sure what to anticipate. But I'm expecting, at least, that we'll probably have a situation where that isn't going to be true. I don't anticipate we're going to lift all the restrictions and business back to normal and everybody's going to be happy and no more COVID. We're going to have some impact, either in localities, maybe nationally, maybe different countries are going to be rebounding and dealing with issues as soon as possibly June. We'll see. That's what some of the projections are. That said, probably not going to see large numbers of people going on vacation. We're probably not going to see the same kinds of interruptions or cycles that we have in the past in the third quarter. It could actually pick up from that. People are finding, okay, how do we do business in this environment? We still need digital transformation. We still need disruptive strategies. We still need software to not only drive our business, but help us be competitive in a corporate recovery in this economic condition. So we could have a very active third quarter. So my message is, think about what we've had experienced before, but also think it may be entirely different, because that can change your plans. You may have a very active third quarter. You may have, the typical downturn. I'm not sure. We'll see what takes place. But either way, the new normal's not going to be normal, and there probably will be multiple next normals instead of one new normal. So I wish you the best as you continue to excel, strategize, deal with current situation, and figure out how we all come together out of this, and hopefully in great shape for as much of us as possible. And for those businesses that are struggling, understand that's a tough place to be. And hopefully you're finding ways and approaches and suggestions and tips that are helping you. So wish you the best. Be careful, be safe, and we'll see you soon.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, back here in the studios, we have another segment for you today. It's Tuesday, so we're going to check in with our friend Mike Vizard on Channel Roundup. And Mike has his Channel Roundup partner, Frank Olhurst, with him. And Frank will give us the news in the channel world. Mike, Frank, it's all yours.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, thanks, guys. Hey, Frank, good to see you again. How are things in the channel?
Things are interesting. The current situation out there has made some things very interesting. And I think there's a lot of new opportunities coming up out there for people that are aggressive about it. And I think there's a lot of perhaps traditional services that might go away. We'll have to see.
So speaking of that and being aggressive, Avanti put out a survey this week talking about how IT teams are struggling on average with 11 different vendors. And of course, we know that people are going to be pretty keen to reduce their costs as we go forward. And one of the ways that they have done that historically is to rely more on managed service providers who essentially consolidate all those vendors and all the headaches that go with that. Do you think that the partners and managed service providers especially should be pushing harder to get customers to understand that, hey, we can have one proverbial MSP ring to rule them all because they'll deal with all the vendors and the headaches?
Yeah, I think, when it comes down to it, being able to kind of unify support across vendors really fits into the game plan of an MSP. And the idea here is that, it makes a lot of those problems go away when it comes to integrating across vendors. Think about how much time the typical, mid-market sized business spends with their own internal support trying to get APIs to work with each other. We're trying to get microservices to talk to each other, when perhaps an MSP might have the experience to make that more simple and get things running in a lot quicker fashion.
Yeah, I just don't know if the MSPs have the marketing savviness to go drive that, or if they're just waiting for somebody to call them and ask them, or do you think that MSPs need to find a way to market themselves more aggressively, but maybe not in a way that comes across as being COVID-19 obnoxious?
Yes, I definitely think they have to find a different marketing mechanism, but they also have to kind of establish an internalized skill set to deal with these various vendors. I mean, I don't think they can go to a new business and say, oh yeah, you're using 7 different vendors and I can support 3 of those. You know, they're going to have to kind of put together a plan on how they can integrate their support across multiple vendors, and also look at what platform will enable them to do that. And I think if they come across with the value proposition of that, yes, we can make things work together, as opposed to the normal pain that folks are going through, especially with this shift to a remote workforce and a mobile workforce. Also driving the whole concept of digital transformation, you know, more things into the cloud, on the web. I think an MSP can come in at that point in time and say that we have successfully done these things and we can ease your path to do that. But they're going to have to come up with a way to demonstrate it, that it's advantageous to everybody involved, as opposed to kind of seizing the horror of COVID-19.
So I need a rationalization for the rationalization, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Hey, I want to pick up on another conversation that we've been having on an ongoing basis, but we talked about how everybody rushed to get their workforces to be able to work remotely. And now they're all struggling with these VPNs that they had in place. And Citrix this week was making a case for a remote PC access tool that they have that they make available via the cloud, and they're making it easier to get this week. And their argument is that their protocol is a lot more efficient in terms of how it sets up tunnels, and you can access applications on the desktop more efficiently versus using traditional VPNs. And I wonder if there's a story or an opportunity for partners to start thinking about how are they going to help customers deal with the new normal. I don't think a lot of people are going back to work anytime soon, and if they do go back to work, they may be working from home a lot more than they think. And is there a time now to start thinking about how are we going to enable that in a more efficient and reasonable way?
Well, if we look at it from the point of view of how many folks out there are using RDP, you know, remote desktop protocol, as opposed to connecting via a VPN or some secure pipe and running the applications locally, there's still a lot of folks out there using the concept of, you know, remote controlling a PC. But with that in mind, that means that if you're going to offer remote, you know, login to a desktop machine, a physical machine, you have to make sure those physical machines are serviceable, operating, and, you know, they need to have a place to be. And that still means, you know, reserving, you know, office space or something along those lines. I think as we transition more into this new normal, I think a lot of businesses might want to reduce their physical footprint, which becomes a problem if you still have to provide, you know, physical office space for each worker, as opposed to a hoteling concept. Now, where this comes into play is that, you know, if we go into the whole virtual desktop infrastructure, you know, something else that Citrix does for folks, that, you know, using, you know, VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, you can create these virtual PCs that folks can access remotely, but they live out, you know, either on the cloud or on a server, as opposed to requiring that physical machine. That allows you to kind of reduce that physical footprint in the office. And if you still need that physical footprint in the office, you could then, you know, regulate, you know, the cubicles to using something along the lines of a Chromebook to access these virtual desktops, which then becomes a portable device that the end user can bring home to, you know, work remotely. So there's a lot of issues that we have to really think about here in the grand scheme of things. First of all, you know, VPNs are struggling under this idea of secure connectivity. Every day, the NVD, the National Vulnerabilities Database, reports another vulnerability around a particular VPN. whether it's around the physical hardware or the protocol that's used or something like that. We're seeing VPN licensing costs go up because for each concurrent user, you need a license usually. So VPNs are becoming less viable for the long term. They've made a great, temporary solution, which means businesses have to think about how are they going to move into a realm of supporting a remote worker, which means they might have to rethink their physical infrastructure, move over into, a virtual desktop infrastructure, which solves some of the security problems, but, increases some of the management overhead. But, so, if I was an MSP out there right now and talking to customers, I would talk to them about, this transition. Hey, let's move away from the VPN into this remote desktop solution that Citrix is offering so that people can, remote, RDP into their physical desktops. And then let's talk about migrating those physical desktops into a virtual infrastructure to give you kind of this short-term and long-term solution to the problems that VPNs are creating.
And so it's kind of like a two-step dance. First thing I'm going to do is find a more efficient way to remotely log in. And then I'm going to, take some time and think it through and figure out what workloads can go up on VDI, which may run in a local data center somewhere, or it may run up in the cloud somewhere.
Right. I mean, you even have, VDI offerings available via Microsoft Azure. So, I mean, it could be something that lives in the cloud if it's a cloud-orientated business, or it becomes an opportunity for maybe an MSP to sell, a multiprocessor server that can handle, 10, 15, 20 virtual desktops at a time. And either way, it's a path to this virtual desktop, which becomes something that is a monthly management fee, as opposed to a sell it and forget it type of one-time deal.
Oh. So there were other big doings this week in the world of the channel, and one of them was this IBM Partner World Conference, which is this year a subset of the IBM Think Digital Conference. And during that conference, the IBMers got up there and described their new approach to the channel, where they're going to emphasize what it sounds like is three basic motions. One is called build, the other is called service, and the other one's called sell. And they were making it pretty clear, though, that a lot of the love is going to go to the partners who are capable of building their own IP and adding value that way. I mean, IBM still appreciates the focus on service and selling, but they really want partners who can drive their own IP to drive their own margins and not be so dependent upon IBM. We've been hearing this drumbeat before, but I wonder, as we kind of look at this new normal, and there should be theoretically a lot more reliance on digital businesses, has the time come for the channel to finally make that move to where they are building their own IP?
Definitely, I think so. That's one way that you can establish value and make your business a little more attractive than perhaps the neighboring business when it comes to servicing your customers. And we've kind of seen, a model like this working in a different fashion. Look at, customizing Salesforce, for example. You have Salesforce as a cloud-based offering, and then you have, solution providers out there that build custom IP around what Salesforce can do, either by integrating it into other applications or even coding their own type of solutions. So if we kind of extend that ideology forward into what IBM is talking about, here we have an opportunity where IBM can offer all of the foundational aspects and the support that's needed to the channel, while the channel builds on that foundation, and that becomes their value add, what they sell to their customers. It could work out quite well as more and more businesses move to become more cloud-centric. On the flip side, it's going to be a challenge for a lot of these solution providers to develop these skill sets and develop something unique to be able to sell that as their own intellectual property out into customers, as opposed to using the old traditional custom programming solution where the customer says, I need this, and then the solution provider is like, I can do that, and it's a one-off deal for that particular customer. How do they capitalize on this to make it a more vertical market centric type of offering, so that they can address not only the custom needs of one particular customer, but also bring that forward to others in that same vertical market? So it can be tricky to do, but it is very possible.
All right, well, there was a related conference this week, sort of, if you think it through, but GitHub had an online event, and they were talking about how the repository is going to evolve over time to host these discussions and make it easier for people to collaborate on these types of projects where they are building things. And they've made it a lot easier to spin up a project. It can now be done in a couple of seconds. You don't have to even be a rocket scientist to get that far. And their point is that as we go forward here, everybody and almost anybody can start building something and then working with other people to extend it or build a little ecosystem around it. So do you think that the channel is going to have to learn how to spell a little DevOps if they are going to go start building IP, and make the connection for me?
Well, one of the most interesting things about the announcements coming out of GitHub is the idea that they're now providing an IDE, an integrated development environment, which has always been kind of one of the challenges around some of these community efforts. Everybody would use kind of their own tool, and it would add a lot of overhead and introduce some confusion. Now, the idea of them providing an integrated development environment, which kind of generalizes or standardizes how you're going to interact and work with others, it becomes something that's very viable for the channel to start looking into and to move deeper into that DevOps methodology. And also be able to build on DevOps solutions, like getting involved in DevSecOps to create more secure solutions. And also create that continuous integration, continuous development pipeline, which might better service their customers. Because now you're dealing with a development case that is no longer based on the old-fashioned waterfall way of delivering applications. Now you're moved into that continuous development cycle, which each continuous development might be a billable item or a standardized fee done monthly. That, okay, we'll add these requested features, get them in and get them out to you, and each one is a charge. So there's a real potential for them to get involved into this DevOps offering and becoming the centerpiece of custom development for their customers, and then be able to apply that to multiple customers, and then be part of a community where they can kind of share discoveries and also get involved with debugging and patching and everything else to support these applications.
At the same conference, Anchor was talking about how they've come up with a security tool for containers running on Windows platforms. And I wonder if the channels are going to be forced down this DevOps path anyway, as Microsoft continues to embrace containers and Kubernetes and serverless computing frameworks. And the expectation is that everything is going to be much more modular and much more customizable. So maybe the partners who have not had a lot of exposure to DevOps because they haven't been really operating in that Linux side of the world are going to find themselves pushed down the path anyway.
Yeah, they might be pushed down the path anyway, but what's interesting about that is talking about the security aspect of containers, maintaining security in a container. You have a lot of the vendors out there that are in the vulnerability assessment, vulnerability management market that are now starting to offer solutions to check for vulnerabilities on containers. Some of them are even, moving into the arena of doing real-time assessment, and they're combining that with, some penetration testing services, and they're also using, the large-scale databases like the National Vulnerability Database feeds and other feeds to kind of identify these vulnerabilities before they become something that is either widely known or something that becomes an attack vector. And then they're incorporating, the capabilities to start, automatically patching, as opposed to, creating a vulnerability report, helping, humans to prioritize the vulnerabilities, and then telling humans, okay, you need to do this type of patching. There's a large opportunity there for that whole workflow to be automated and driven by, AI and ML, which means that we can introduce security from that, vulnerability fighting aspect across the whole stack, and, solve maybe some of the DevSecOps issues that are currently coming up. I think that is more of a longer term, route to follow. But if you need to secure containers today, what we were just talking about is the thing that, MSPs might need to look into immediately until we see these emerging technologies really take hold.
So if you bring it all back together, there's definitely going to be a wave of consolidation driven by the technology as it evolves. The lines between various things are going to blur. So maybe the best advice to the partner is to do unto others before somebody does unto you, because it's going to happen no matter what.
That's very true. That's very true. It's going to be very critical for the partners out there to kind of get ahead of the game at this point in time. Otherwise, we're going to see, a potential shrinking of the channel, like what we saw when break-fix evolved into services. A lot of folks out there just could not make that leap, and became irrelevant in the channel. So I think we're at kind of another chasm here, where you've got the way that people have been doing business up until a couple of months ago. They're going to have to rethink, what the future is going to look like in the very near term, and how they're going to adapt their services to meet these changes, many of which have been forced upon us by this pandemic that has really changed the face of how IT interacts with end users, vendors, and even internal management.
Yeah, my sense of things is there was a short freeze, but the more I talk to people, the more I'm getting the sense that a lot of the trends that we thought were going to take a while to develop are actually starting to accelerate, and we may see a level of change here that is happening at a faster rate than in memory. But it's too early to say that for sure, but it's starting to feel that way.
Yes, and there is the potential for the partners to be left behind unless they're aggressive about understanding the new technology, leveraging the educational opportunities the vendors are offering, and also kind of learning how to mitigate problems a little bit better and a little bit faster. Because as these technologies accelerate and new technologies emerge, problems are going to arise that people had not considered beforehand. Perfect example is how, it might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but how ill-prepared the whole VPN market was to deal with this wholesale shift to remote work. I think we're going to see that happen with other technologies in the very near term.
All right. Hey, Frank, as always, it's great catching up with you. Looking forward to talking to you again next week. And Alan, back to you.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Okay, everyone. Mike, Frank, thanks for a great channel roundup. That's going to wrap up our coverage for today. It was a great show. I hope you enjoyed it. Most of these segments are available as standalones if you want to just watch them. And of course, the whole show is available on demand across our network. But until tomorrow, and by the way, we have another good show lined up for tomorrow. Until tomorrow, though, this is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. Here's hoping that you're safe, you're well, you're strong, TechStrong.